It's October 29th, 2020. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode number 57 of Roqe. Omidvar hastam ke khub bashin. I'm Jian Ghomeshi, hoping you are doing all right out there, wherever you are. We are on our ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity, coming to you on Telegram, on Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember, for all things Roqe, our website is the place to find all of our previous episodes and links to our platforms and our Roqe Reads blog and comments. That's roqemedia.com, roqemedia.com. You know, we've been talking a lot recently about the situation of political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Iran, a situation that reverberates in different ways for those of us across the diaspora, feeling outrage or shame, embarrassment, anger, or helplessness. And at the center of political prisoners and human rights activists is Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Iranian lawyer who has been put in jail again in Iran and whose health and situation is becoming quite dire in recent days. She's also quite extraordinary, as you may know, having just won the Alternative Nobel Prize for Human Rights this month. So we've opted to stray from our regular format and do another Roqe special in order to spread the word, educate ourselves as much as we can, and listen to those who can tell us a little bit more of what's happening with Nasrin Sotoudeh's situation from a political or social, cultural, historical, and ethical perspective. In the coming 3 hours, it's long, but you can listen to it in parcels or all in one go if you want. We want to do our best to learn about the situation of Nasrin Sotoudeh, who she is, the role she has played in the field of human rights in Iran, and what her current ongoing imprisonment means for her, for Iranians, and for the world. We're going to go to a number of notable voices in the Iranian diaspora around the world to help out with this. So we are going to hear from Elahe Sharifpour Hicks in New York, Natalie Amiri in Munich, Abdolkarim Lahiji in Paris, Ramin Jahanbegloo in Toronto, Mehrangiz Kar, who resides in Washington, D.C., Hossein Raisi in Ottawa, Jeff Kaufman, the director of the new documentary Nasrin, in Los Angeles, and a special update and message from Nasrin Sotoudeh's husband, Reza Khandan, in Tehran. This show will be in English and Persian, mostly in English, but there's some Persian, and we have subtitles on some of the Persian material. So if you are listening on, say, Spotify or iTunes or SoundCloud, and you do not speak Persian, you may want to switch to YouTube or Instagram or Telegram to see the subtitles. So let's begin. First, with some background about the woman at the center of this episode. This is a Roqe special, The Case for Nasrin. She is quickly becoming an international figure who is easily identifiable by just one name, Nasrin. And no amount of detention, suppression, oppression, or fear-mongering by a regime intent on silencing her seems to prevent her from continuing on her journey towards democracy and justice. Nasrin Sotoudeh is an Iranian attorney. She is known for her staunch advocacy for children's rights, women's rights, human rights. She has devoted her life to speaking out against injustices carried out by authorities under the Islamic Republic. She has stood firm against systemic discrimination and stood for freedom of speech and basic tenets enshrined in the UN Charter of Human Rights. Her guiding principles have been to do what is ethical and do what is right under international law. She's a founding member of a group in Iran opposed to capital punishment. Her long opposition to the obligatory hijab and her defense of political prisoners and minority rights are well known. She was one of the originators of the 2005 movement, the 1 Million Signatures campaign for equality under the law, which aimed at removing discriminatory laws against women. That was around the time when she went from diminutive, hardworking lawyer to influential and undeniable presence in the fight for equality. Nasrin was born in 1963 into a middle-class Iranian family. She studied law at the National University in Tehran and passed the bar in 1995, soon emerging as one of the most active members of the Law Society. When she started her practice, the horror that she faced was completely beyond her expectation. She found children as young as 11 under death sentences, myriad cases of child abuse, domestic attacks on women and children, human rights abuses, and cases involving defenders of democratic rights. She threw herself into the legal defense of those who needed help and were victims of human rights violations. That resolve and impact of Nasrin Sotoudeh soon made her an enemy of the Iranian authorities. Nasrin was initially arrested in 2010 and served 3 years. Her first hunger strike made news stories around the world. Then she was suddenly released on the eve of President Hassan Rouhani's trip to New York to attend the opening of the UN General Assembly. But her rights were restricted as a lawyer for some time, and her freedom was ultimately ephemeral. She took the case of those young women challenging Iran's rigid hijab laws and was soon apprehended again. In 2018, she was arrested alongside the imprisonment of a number of other human rights lawyers, solidly placing Iran among the handful of countries where lawyers are seized simply for defending those accused of political offenses. The exact length of Nasrin Sotoudeh's prison term remains unclear. The official sentence seems to be 38 years in prison and 148 lashes for doing her job as a lawyer. Members of her family have also been threatened, arrested, and detained as a way of further neutering her strength. She recently went on another hunger strike, was moved to a more difficult prison, and as of yesterday, was refusing her own heart medication in protest. And yet, through all this, Nasrin Sotoudeh remains, as she has always been, a courageous fighter for basic human rights. She will continue this struggle, it seems, no matter how long the authorities keep her in prison. She and other Iranian female activists are role models and leaders of the struggle for equality and justice in Iran. Nasrin Sotoudeh has become a global symbol, an example, and perhaps someone destined to join the names of those brave souls who have created groundbreaking change around the world throughout history. This is the case for Nasrin. Okay, let's get started and go to New York, and the first of a diversity of voices we want to hear from in the coming 2.5 hours. My first guest today, giving us a broader context for the importance of Nasrin Sotoudeh and her imprisonment, is a leading Iranian-American human rights activist. Elahe Sharifpour Hicks was educated in Iran at the University of Tehran Faculty of Law and Political Science and moved to the United States in 1987. She completed Fordham Law School in New York in 1991 and began her career with international organizations focusing on human rights issues. She contributed to a report on the legal system of the Islamic Republic of Iran, published by the then Lawyers Committee for Human Rights in 1992. Between 1994 and 2003, she was the researcher on Iran for Human Rights Watch, where she wrote numerous reports on human rights issues in Iran and conducted advocacy with Iranian officials. She traveled to Iran repeatedly on human rights missions during that period, meeting with many leading Iranian activists. Elahe was instrumental in bringing prominent human rights lawyer Shirin Ebadi, the Nobel laureate, on her first advocacy visits to the U.S. in 1999 1996 and 1998. Elahe has successfully directed multiple projects for Partners for Rights, aimed at building the capacity of Iranian lawyers to use international human rights standards in their domestic legal practices. And right now, Elahe Sharifpour Hicks joins me from New York today. Hello.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for leading off our show. It's important that we have you here. We really appreciate it. You have worked in human rights issues for years. Elahe, can you give us a context for the importance of Nasrin Sotoudeh, both as an advocate for human rights in Iran and, in the last decade or so, as a symbol of someone whose human rights are being violated herself under the Islamic Republic authorities?
Yes, as you mentioned while you are introducing me, since I started working in the field of human rights and I focus on Iran, I truly believe that any change that it would happen in Iran, it should be from Iranian laws. As you might know, Iranian laws are so discriminatory. The violation is institutionalized in Iranian law. So who can change those laws? Are Iranian lawyer that working hard since 42 years since the revolution, and the only independent organization that we have after revolution, Iran Bar Association, is under attack systematically by Iranian authority and Iranian judiciary. And lawyers are working hard, and Nasrin is one of them right now. And unfortunately, her condition is, as you mentioned, she's in prison. I truly believe law in Iran should change. If we are expecting any changes and expecting improvement in human rights situation in Iran, I believe through Iranian lawyer is one of the mechanisms that this change can happen. And that's why we can talk about Nasrin's and other lawyers that really sacrifice their life and they put their life on the line to improve, and really no need for a lawyer to go to prison because just defending another victim of human rights violation.
Exactly. Listen, I should say, for people who are listening to this, there are going to be a lot of Iranians or people of Iranian descent who are familiar with the interesting legal journeys that occur in Iran or have in the last few decades. But for people who are listening who really aren't as familiar, how are we to make sense of the judiciary system in Iran that would imprison a lawyer simply for defending others who have been arrested? Can you even put into words how we're supposed to understand this system?
As simple like that. For your audience, Iranian judicial system is not accountable to anyone except the Iranian leader. It's a selective procedure. The head of the judiciary is not an independent person. It's selected directly by Iranian leader, Mr. Khamenei, and he's only accountable to him. And unfortunately, since the beginning of the revolution 41 years ago, this institution, three power, judiciary, legislative, and executive, should be independent from each other. But this institution, specifically the judiciary, is very politicized. It's completely politicized. It's not independent, and that's the problem. We don't have, as in Iranian, many Iranians say, we don't have adalat khane. We don't have any justice, any house of justice that Iranian could go there and seek justice, because the judiciary is very politicized and not accountable to anyone except the leader.
Well, that also means that we then don't have human rights in Iran. How did human rights come to be portrayed as a quote-unquote Western concept in some circles in Iran? This is something I can't totally get my head around. It seems strange that human rights would ever be considered anything other than universal. Tell me about that.
Well, if I talk about the story, really story of a late Mr. Khorasani, he used to be first ambassador or second ambassador, Iran ambassador at the United Nations. He was accused of some shoplifting, and he went back to Iran. He could speak English, and he became the head of the first government, I should say, but an association, human rights association within the parliament. He was selected as a member of parliament, and he was headed at this association within the parliament. They call it Commission 90, which is famous, and still that commission is working to look at human rights violation by the government, by the legislative power. However, one of my trips to Iran during President Khatami, he told me as his official capacity, that we wanted to have human rights. We didn't know what is human rights. The member of parliament, they don't know respect for human rights. And since they start attacking us and our political behavior, meaning he meant mass execution at the beginning of the revolution, all the execution, he said, so all we could do is politicize human rights. And this is quote unquote, politicize the notion of human rights. And all we could take the human rights issue and talk about Palestinian violation of human rights. And we couldn't have an answer. Parliamentarian does not know what is, quote unquote, Mr. Rajai Khorasani said to me directly, and it's been written in my reports. We could not, the member of parliament, they don't know what does it mean, respect of individual rights. And if we talk about that, a political prisoner's right, they come and they beat me in middle of the middle of the parliament, he said, again, quote unquote, and this conversation has been published by Human Rights Watch. So going back to 90s, and this conversation is a long time ago. So that's all about human rights in Iran. Is again, like it's become a tool.
But isn't this ironic? Given that if you go, I don't want to get too into the weeds on this because it would take an entire show, but if you go quite far back in history, I mean, I'm to understand that actually the concept of human rights originated from Persians. and so now we've got to a point in the 21st century where it is portrayed as a Western concept and not applied in the country or in the place that many would argue it actually originated.
When we have a law that in that law you take the custody of a child and give it to the father upon the divorce and say the woman there's no capacity woman to take care of her own child. So we have, as I told you at the beginning, Iranian laws violate Iranian human rights, Iranians' rights, minority, ethnic minority, religious minority, children, women, all of them, their rights is being violated in written laws in Iran. Yes, you're talking about our history, but unfortunately, laws changed since the revolution, and we have, I don't want to use that, the horrific laws that violate Iranian people, all sorts of Iranian, and that the laws should change, and that's why we have another politicized human rights issue, and we have, on the other hand, law violation that has been institutionalized in our laws.
So when it comes to human rights, women's rights, children's rights, minority rights, that has become the life work of Nasrin Sotoudeh. Let me ask you specifically about her now. As we start off this special, I have to say, there has been coverage in recent years in mainstream media, international campaigns for her release. There is now a major documentary about her that's being released, and I would say, hopefully, having seen it, because it's quite powerful, it'll get seen by many around the world. Why does the Nasrin Sotoudeh story resonate for so many around the world?
Because unfortunately, there are many other countries that lawyers are being under attack, just defending victim of human rights violation. Nasrin is among those lawyers, and there are many of them. Right now, 6-7 of them in prison, simply because they defend the victim of human rights violation inside Islamic Republic prisons. Nasrin, I mean, I should say she used many. She went hunger strike. She's outspoken, and for that reason, she managed, how to say, the international community are paying attention because of her condition, and she is a woman, and she is very outspoken in a way that I have problem, and I do not approve of a woman go hunger strike for many weeks and days. She's harming herself. She's sacrificing her health that in order to raise her voice. Many other lawyers still in prison and they are quiet, and that's why, in my view, Nasrin is using these tools to call the international community attention for the situation inside Iran and inside Iranian prisons.
It has been said quite regularly now that the leading agents of social change and activism in Iran, I guess we would include you in this, in recent decades, are women, especially in the context of Iran's patriarchal culture. Even many of the most well-known political prisoners have been women, people like Narges Mohammadi, who was released recently, or Narges Hosseini, who Nasrin defended. What has Nasrin Sotoudeh meant to women's role in the broader struggle for basic political and civil rights in the country?
Well, she became a symbol for many Iranian women, not specifically lawyers. You know that, as you mentioned, we have so many activists, thank God, staying in Iran. They are in Iran, and her resistance, her capability to raise her voice, and under this very difficult situation, talk about her and put a pressure by Iranian government to just demand the situation for herself. She's not asking a fair trial for herself. She should have, but she's asking for the situation of political prisoner. She is doing a battle that I must say 100, 200, many should do it together, an organization. As you know, we don't have any independent human rights organization in Iran. They don't allow any independent association, even charity as organization to practice in Iran. So Nasrin become a voice of an organization, a very vast organization inside Iran. And unfortunately, she's talking from prisons, which is should raise concern about her health. And I hope that she take care of herself.
Elahe, you said a few moments ago that this is about changing Iranian laws. In this new documentary about Nasrin Sotoudeh, entitled Nasrin, and we have the director Jeff Kaufman coming up in a little while on this special, Nasrin says at one point in the doc, you can't just change the way governance is done in Iran. The public culture needs to change. Do you have a sense of what she means by that?
Oh, absolutely. If you think tomorrow we have a government that scream for human rights, improve of human rights, or respect for human rights, as long as we have the culture and that because in Iranian school, elementary, kindergarten, all the way up, this issue of a culture, respecting each individual rights, teamwork, working together, respecting each other, respecting our religious, respecting our identity, tolerating each other. These are not being taught in our school in Iran. So we have lots of work, and I understand what Nasrin is saying. Before everything, we must work hard, and Iranian inside Iran are very smart, young generation. They know there is a lot to work, and unfortunately they've been denied access and contact with the international community that they can learn from each other and improve the situation. That is another major problem that Iranians inside the country they are facing. Honestly, they are very smart, very well educated. They know what to do better than everyone, but they are very isolated, and they need help from international community, all sorts of help, and start from first grade, kindergarten, all the way up to improve this first thing, tolerate each other and respect each other.
That's quite a mountain to climb.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, you've been at this for decades. Nasrin Sotoudeh, when you talk about the hunger strike, it's almost like asking, well, which one? I mean, she was on a hunger strike 10 years ago, the first time they imprisoned her. And so it's hard to not get deflated and think that things are simply not changing. How do you deal with managing your own cynicism?
Listen, human rights is nothing that you expect perhaps when I started back in 1992, many people, legendary, as you mentioned, Mr. Lahiji, Dr. Anwari based in London, Shirin Ebadi, Mehrangiz Kar, that they really, really sacrificed their life and they left everything behind. They said, we are not going to see the change in our life. And after that, my life, and many, many, unfortunately, it's a process. It's a really process. And it's a long, long way. But every step, I do believe we can change. We can move the mountain, but it's not in my generation, perhaps, or Shirin Ebadi or Mehrangiz, or even Nasrin. But there's the only thing we cannot stop. And we owe it to younger. And when I see many, as you know, I am working with Iranian lawyer inside Iran, and we work training and learning how to use international human rights mechanism. I can see every day, and it's empowering me to see how dedicated Iranian women and men, young lawyer, they are ready to go, and hopefully they are going to achieve, but we don't know when.
Elahe, before I let you go, a couple of questions about just the reality of what we're seeing right now with the Nasrin Sotoudeh case. I wonder about how the regime, I suspect I'm going to ask this question of a few of the guests today, but how the regime is weighing the costs of keeping Nasrin detained. I mean, it would seem prudent, given that she has become this international figure. She's become this symbol. People are using words like Mandela when they describe her. It would seem almost prudent for the regime to release her, if not to just tamp down the kind of coverage she's getting, unless, of course, that just falls on deaf ears in Iran. Anything that might be said by Amnesty International or The Guardian or whomever outside of Iran. Why do you think that they keep imprisoning someone who's getting this much attention?
Listen, there are hundreds, not thousands, like Nasrin outside in Iran. They're living in Iran. They have to create an environment and to intimidate them. What they can do, keep Nasrin. Nasrin doesn't do anything. Nasrin is asking to improve the situation of Iranian prison and release political prisoner, or she's asking for fair trial. She's not asking anything. She's not asking for changing the government. There are thousands like Nasrin inside Iran. How to silence them? Keep Nasrin and like Nasrin inside prison. And unfortunately, they managed to do that. Why? Because Iranian, under the sanction, under the poverty, under the economic situation of pressure, that unfortunately, and isolation of Iranian, society inside the country, they cannot even travel anymore. So here we are. Iran would not respond to anyone. And again, we have a major vacuum in international community. Look what happened to the United States. Look what's happening to Human Rights Council. Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia are member of Human Rights Council. So Libya. So we have this big, huge vacuum outside. Weakening, that's, I'm not saying weakening, it's a big vacuum by international community actor, major actor, and inside, Iranian are under pressure, economic pressure, that they have to look for bread and water. So, and the government can do whatever they do, because that's the way they can right now.
A final question to you. It's been so important to have you on this program and leading us off. Thank you so much for doing this. You know, this program is officially, at least ostensibly, about people of Iranian descent living in the diaspora. So people in our global community, although we have some people listening and streaming us from Iran itself. Outside of Iran, it's clear the importance of Nasrin Sotoudeh and the fight for human rights inside Iran. What do you believe the relevance of Nasrin in this case is for those of us who are Iranians living in the diaspora?
It's all we have to do, honestly, and all we can do, many of us, just to be a platform, to be a voice. Your program, introducing Nasrin to international community, to Iranian generation Iranian outside Iran. So that's all we can do. Be not be our own voice, be their voice, and be Nasrin's voice. Be a platform for whatever Nasrin is asking. Maybe I can go to European Union. Maybe you or I can go to Human Rights Council and Iran, those that working on United Nations. Reach out to Secretary General and talk. Be a voice for Nasrin, and so many like Nasrin inside Iranian prison, unfortunately, or outside. They are working hard, night and day.
Elahe Sharifpour Hicks, I thank you so much for taking the time today, for helping us understand what's going on, and I hope to get to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I wish you all the best and good luck with your program.
Merci. Khodafez.
Merci. Qurbanit baram.
This is a Roqe special, The Case for Nasrin, coming to you on Telegram, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Instagram, and YouTube. We just heard a broader perspective around Nasrin and human rights from Elahe Hicks. My next guest can give us a view of Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Iranian judiciary, and all that this story represents from both a journalistic viewpoint and a very personal proximity as well. She has live reported from war zones and the sites of natural disasters around the world, and has interviewed powerful Iranian figures such as Rafsanjani, Mousavi, Zahra Rahnavard, Karoubi, Khatemi, Ahmadinejad, and Nasrin Sotoudeh a few times. Natalie Amiri is an award-winning German-Iranian journalist. She studied Eastern Studies with a focus on Iranian studies. She has worked at the German embassy in Tehran and for numerous news programs and magazines, as well as television and radio stations such as ARD Broadcasters, Daily Themes, Phoenix, and Deutschland Radio. Natalie has been ARD's chief correspondent at the Tehran bureau for the past 5 years. She has reported from Iran for many years, and she has been regularly in touch with Nasrin Sotoudeh and her husband Reza Khandan. And Natalie Amiri joins me from Munich, Germany right now. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
Nice to have you back on the program. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There have been thousands of political prisoners in Iran, prisoners of conscience, as you know, as we all know, devastating stories, all worthy of being told. In your view, why has the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh become such a beacon of so much attention?
Nasrin Sotoudeh is not an unknown lawyer. You know, she is the symbol for the human rights fight against the regime, and she's such a brave woman for women's rights. So I was several times with her in court, and I accompanied her during her work. And she was like, you know, everybody in Iran knows her. She is the one of the few lawyers in Iran who fighting for women rights in front of the court. So in all of the campaigns, and the women, the girls, when they went out and, took their scarves off. So she was the one who had the courage to go in front of the court and fight for them. So she's a very, famous and brave woman of Iran.
As you say, she's famous for women's rights, children's rights, human rights. When did you, and minority rights, fighting for religious minorities, etc. When did you first hear of her? Do you remember your first encounter with her?
Yes, she was the lawyer of Sinan. He was getting the death penalty, but he was convicted as a minor. She was fighting for him. So I knew Nasrin from this case on. It's about, let me think, 13 years ago. Since then, I'm all the time, being in contact with her and accompanying her while she is doing her work. Last time I was interviewing her when she was, she was one of the actresses in the movie Tehran Taxi from
Jeff Kaufman. Yes.
And she was really saying really brave things. And also after in the interview, she was saying things, and during I did the interview, I was thinking, oh my God, when she's now saying this and I broadcast it, she will go to prison, because it's so, you don't hear such, input and such brave sentences from people in Iran, because it's like, you say this, it's being broadcasted, and the next day they will pick you up and bring you to prison. So it's very brave to say something in Iran. So we have a lot of Iranians outside of Iran. They're brave and they say something like this, but it's completely a difference to say it in Iran.
When you started interviewing her, when you got to know her, what impressed you the most? I mean, clearly her courage, but what can you tell us about her character, as some of us who just know her as this incredible human rights lawyer, this symbol? What do you know about her personally that you would want people to know?
She said the worst thing for her is to be silent. And even in prison, she gave a letter out, and I will write you some sentences from this letter, and then you understand this person. She said, Iran is a country where women's rights are systematically violated. It is all the more important to honor and commemorate International Women's Day. On this day, I think of the years that have passed, the years of our silence and our imprisonment, the years of protest, bondage, and walls behind which we are trapped. So she is saying this from the prison. She's already caught, she is behind bars. So she's still not silent.
Yes.
And that's, I'm really
You're
impressed.
in awe. Yeah, yes, indeed. She is in prison currently, again, as we know, and it's, from what we hear, a dire situation. I know you've been in touch with the family, and you actually have an exclusive message you got for us today. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I was talking 2 hours ago with her husband, Reza Khandan, and let's hear what he told me about her health condition.
Please.
نسرین از وقتی رفته بیمارستان زندان قرچک، خب اونجا یکی دو بار اومدن ملاقات هایی با مسئولین سازمان زندان ها و معاون حقوق بشر قوه قضاییه، رفتن اونجا بازدید کردن و باهاش صحبت کردن. پرونده‌ای هم توی پزشکی قانونی به جریان افتاده که چون مشکل قلبیش خیلی جدی و خطرناکه، حتی ما بحث مرخصی استعلاجی بود که بهشون گفتیم، دیروز اتفاقا داشتیم با یکی دو نفر از اینا صحبت میکردیم، میگفتیم که برای ما حیاتیه که این در اسرع وقت بره، یا مرخصی میخوایم بدین سریع بدین، چه میدونم خودتون میبرید سریع ببرید. این مشکل قلبیش خیلی خیلی جدی شده. پریروزم پزشک داخلی زندان قرچک خیلی هشدار داده. اون موقع هم که خودش بیمارستان بود خیلی علائمش رو نداشت، فقط تنگی نفس داشت، ولی کاملا الان علائم خیلی شدید درد سمت چپ قفسه سینه و کشیدگی که میگه تا بالای گردن میرسه. خب کاملا اینا علائم مشکل حاد قلبیه تو این شرایط. اما خب دارن بحث میکنن ببینن کمیسیون پزشکی چه نظری میخواد بده و آیا میخوان که مرخصی استعلاجی بدن بره بیمارستان یا نه. تو این مرحله است فعلا. یکی دو روز دیگه هم تعطیل تا شنبه ببینیم که چه اتفاقاتی خواهد افتاد. خیلی ممنونم.
Yeah. So that is, to be clear, that's Nasrin Sotoudeh's husband, longtime supportive husband, Reza Khandan. And Natalie, you spoke to him. That's from today, huh?
Yeah, that's from today. I'm the whole time in contact with him. Also, the last time, I don't know if in Canada this Alternative Nobel Prize is so famous, but she got this for the first time. An Iranian activist won this award. It's while she was in custody, so she was named one of the winners of this international award. And when I was talking with him, it was Wednesday when they announced the winners, and I asked him, how is the reaction from Nasrin? And he said, look, she doesn't know it because she is in prison, and the next time when I'm allowed to talk with her is on Saturday. So everybody in the world knows that she got this prize, except her.
Did he say how she reacted?
So after this, I was talking on her on the day that she won the prize, so he couldn't tell me exactly her reaction because he didn't know it. She didn't know it. But afterwards, he told me that she was happy, but she's not a selfish person, or it's not about the prestige and the things. She has the hope that due to this prize, the people in the world are paying attention to what's going on in Iran. And Reza Khandan, her husband, told me the same. He said to me, every prize, every announcement, every attention for the people and what's going on in Iran is so important. So, she appreciated it to get this prize.
It's nice to hear Reza Khandan's voice, but quite alarming in terms of the content of what he was saying there about her heart and her chest. And the news came out yesterday that she was refusing to take her heart medication. He sounds exhausted, by the way. I mean, not surprisingly, but this has got to be incredibly difficult. She's in prison and she's not doing well physically.
Yeah, and at the same time, they're trying to attack the daughter of them, and they want to tire them completely. They want to exhaust them so much, and she's still talking.
Natalie, as someone who's accompanied, as you said, Nasrin Sotoudeh to court, watching her defend others, let me ask you about the charges and the convictions on her, because from the outside, as someone who's lived outside of Iran for a lifetime, these charges and convictions they just seem inexplicable, absurd. And then the sentencing of 40 years, 38 years, and lashes and this and that for what seems like a lawyer just defending others. In a nutshell, what can you tell us about this judiciary system in Iran and how we're supposed to make sense of this?
Absurd. It's, a lawyer who is fighting for human rights is getting 38 years in prison and 184 lashes. For what? She did just her job. The thing is that there's no, Iran is always saying we have this democracy and so, but in a democracy, a judicial system is working considering laws. But in Iran, nobody is taking law serious. Everything is, they do what they want. Nobody is respecting the law. There is a law in Iran, but nobody is respecting this. And she was saying the same when she was talking with me in another interview. She said, look, what is bad hijab? There is a hijab or no hijab, but bad hijab. Where is the law for bad hijab? And that's Iran. So, they're doing what they want, and you cannot count on the law. You cannot count on your rights, and that's this dangerous situation in this country.
There's this new documentary about Nasrin, and we've got the director, Jeff Kaufman, coming up in a little while on this special. In this documentary, Natalie, at one point Nasrin says, "We are not angry. We are not hateful. We will not allow them to spill more blood." It's interesting. It would be understandable if she were to say, "We are angry." Tell me about this approach of hers. What have you learned about the way Nasrin has acquitted herself through these recent years when she says, "We're not hateful, but we will not allow them to spill more blood"?
Look, it's hard to say because I saw her the last time 2 years ago, and I don't want to speak in her name. But as I saw her, she is hoping for Iran to have more freedom for the people and to have a judicial system which is following the laws. She doesn't want a regime change. She's not the person who's saying, I don't know, she's not this activist. She is just a lawyer and is fighting for the law and for the rights of the people. So I think that's very important. But the system is considering her as a threat to the national security.
Why do they keep her in prison? Journalists like you with global profiles are reporting on this. There's documentaries being made, an Alternative Nobel Prize being awarded. Wouldn't it be prudent for the regime to actually free her because she's more trouble than it's worth to keep in prison?
No, because I think that the system is in such a death end right now, as we saw what they did to Navid Afkari and all the imprisonments of other people. So recently we have a German Iranian 66 years old architect. She's not an activist. She was just posting maybe 2 posts of pro women rights things, and now she's in prison since 2 weeks. Nobody knows why. So they're just they're making tabula rasa. So they are just imprisoning everybody who can be maybe a danger to the security system, and that I think you can see that the system is somehow collapsing.
Before I let you go, what can you tell us about, you've been in Iran up until May of this year, reporting from the Tehran bureau of your broadcaster for a few years now. What can you tell us about your sense of how Nasrin Sotoudeh is seen by Iranians in Iran?
As I told you at the beginning, she is for them a brave woman, and I never heard something bad about her. Everybody is just thankful for her work and thankful that there's still a person who is fighting for the rights of Iranian people.
Can I just ask you a personal question before you go? You're of Iranian background yourself. I know you profoundly love the country and the people and the culture. There's this sense of déjà vu, or plus ça change, plus ça la même chose, that the more things change, the more things stay the same. The hunger strike that brought Nasrin to international attention, the first one was in 2010. It's now 10 years later, and she's in prison and she's fighting for her health.
Again.
How do you, if you take off your journalist hat for a moment and just talk about yourself as someone who cares about this country and people, how do you process the fact that this seems to just be going in circles?
which is not allowed for journalists to to kick this away that you're an objective journalist. But look, I'm really every day, what you say, so touched and sad and emotionally, really I see the country and I see the people and I see this hopeless fight from them every day. And right now I'm writing a book about the last 40 years in Iran and of Iran and my work there. And I saw, and I was so frustrated while I was writing this book, because it's like you see how the people struggled every, 5-10 years. So you had the student protests 1999, you had the Green Revolution, the Green Movement 2009, you had the protests 2019 again, where they killed 1,500 people. And you see the people are all the time trying to come out of the system, to get more freedom, to get press freedom, to get more rights. And always the system is promising the people, if you go to the next election, you will get this, you will get this. And the people trusted the system so long, and they went to the elections to give their vote to Khatami. They give again the vote to Mousavi. Then they give again the vote to Rouhani. And at the end, they got nothing. And I think that this country, the people, the population is so now frustrated and they're not believing anything. So the next election will happen in March. I think they can put as a candidate the perfect Khatami in line and nobody will go to vote for him anymore. So the system is really in a crisis, financially and also from his ideologic. Nobody is believing in I cannot say nobody, but a lot of people lost their hope or the thoughts of the Islamic Republic and the Islamic ideology.
Natalie, it's very special to speak to you again. I love hearing from you. I love learning from you, and I thank you so much for this. We'll look forward to the book, and I appreciate you coming on today.
You're very welcome.
Merci. Khodafis.
Khodafis.
This is a Roqe special, The Case for Nasrin. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. And our website is roqemedia.com, where you can link to all of our previous episodes and all of our different platforms, roqemedia.com. My next guest is someone well-positioned to speak to the legal dimensions of the Nasrin Sotoudeh imprisonment in Iran. He is one of the most recognized Iranian stalwarts of the global focus on human rights and democracy, who refers to Nasrin as his dear friend and colleague. Abdol-Karim Lahiji is a lawyer and human rights activist. He was elected as the president of the International Federation for Human Rights in 2013, having previously served as the vice president from 1998 to 2013. He has also been the president of the League for the Defense of Human Rights in Iran since 1983. Mr. Lahiji is a former Confederation of Students activist and was the student representative in the National Front during the 1960s. And right now, Abdolkarim Lahiji joins me from Paris, France today. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Merci که وقتتون به ما دادین. Mr. Lahiji, I know Nasrin Sotoudeh is a friend of yours, and her imprisonment and suppression by authorities in Iran at various times and in various ways over the last 2 decades is not new to you. What can you tell us about the current situation and the official and unofficial pretexts for locking Nasrin up?
اجازه بدید از نظر تاریخی این نکته رو یادآور بشم که اولین گروهی که خمینی بهشون حمله کرد و فحاشی کرد حقوقدان ها بودن، درست 1-2 ماه بعد از انقلاب. چرا؟ برای اینکه خمینی میخواست در ایران یک حکومتی رو برقرار کنه که با قانون، با حقوق سر و کار نداشته باشه. بنابراین حقوقدان، وکیل دادگستری برای خمینی مثل دشمن بود. و توجه داشته باشید که کانون وکلا مطابق قوانین ایران یک نهاد مستقل بود، یعنی non-governmental organization بود. و آخرین انتخابات کانون وکلا در بهار سال 57 صورت گرفته بود و هر 2 سال یک بار باید انتخابات تجدید می شد و یه هیئت مدیره جدیدی انتخاب می شدن. سال 59، یعنی فقط 1 سال و 2-3 ماه بعد از انقلاب، بهشتی که اون موقع رئیس دیوان کشور بود نامه نوشت به کانون وکلا، یعنی به ما، که شما حق ندارید انتخابات برگزار کنید و 17 سال کانون وکلا رو بستن. بنابراین نسرین ستوده و تمام کسانی که به عنوان لویر، به عنوان حقوقدان، به عنوان وکیل دادگستری در ایران فعالیت میکردن، صرف نظر از این که چقدر مشکلات برای اینا به وجود آوردن که بتونن پروانه وکالت بگیرن، مثل نسرین که 8 سال در انتظار مونده بود، بعدم که شروع به کار کردن انقدر مشکلات برایشون به وجود آوردن که دومین باری است که نسرین ستوده به زندان میفته. بار اول بیشتر از 3 سال در زندان بود. بالاخره با فشار اتحادیه اروپا بود که نسرین آزاد شد، ولی دیدید که چند سال بعد 2 مرتبه براش پرونده دوم درست کردن و الان متاسفانه بیشتر از 2 سال که نسرین در زندانی.
ولی آقای لهیجی، از خودتون الان گفتین که there have been thousands of political prisoners in Iran, many of them lawyers, many of them defending human rights. Why is the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh capturing the imagination of people around the world? Why is it particularly important?
ببینید، برای جمهوری اسلامی متهم سیاسی is as a criminal، مثل جنایتکاره. بنابراین کسی که در تظاهرات بر ضد جمهوری اسلامی شرکت بکنه، این آدم دشمن جمهوری اسلامی، از انمی میگه این دشمنه. بنابراین کسی حق نداره از دشمن دفاع کنه، یعنی کسی که از دشمن دفاع کنه is as accomplice، معاون اون جرمه. بنابراین اینا از روز خود من بیشتر از 2 سال نتونستم در ایران بمونم. چرا؟ برای اینکه وکیل 2 تا از کسانی بودم که در زندان بودن. هیچ قانونی نمیتونه بگه که من هم در ارتکاب اون جرم با اون شریک بودم، غیر از قانون جمهوری اسلامی، یعنی غیر از منتالیته، غیر از ذهنیت جمهوری اسلامی که وکیل رو شریک متهم میدونه. بنابراین وقتی نسرین ستوده از یک خانومی که حجاب اجباری رو قبول نکرده دفاع میکنه، همون خانوم رو محکوم میکنه، هم نسرین ستوده رو، برای اینکه میگه تو وقتی می از این دفاع میکنی، یعنی اینکه برخلاف اون چیزی که من میگم که این متهمه و بنابراین باید محکوم بشه، تو میخوای از اون دفاع بکنی. چون از اون دفاع میکنی، بنابراین مسئولیت اعمال اون متوجه تو هم میشه.
But how do they justify this legally? You're a lawyer yourself. I mean, help me with this from the outside. Yani, as someone who's lived outside of Iran for a lifetime, the charges and convictions themselves seem bizarre or inexplicable, but the sentencing, 38 years in jail, it just seems unfathomable, or if not outrageous. So in a nutshell, what can you tell us about how this is justified in the judiciary system? How do we make sense of this legally, or at least what do they say?
ببینید، در ایران جودیشری سیستم وجود نداره. رئیس قوه قضاییه، یعنی جودیشری سیستم، یه آخوندیه که این آخوند نه تحصیلات حقوقی کرده، نه هیچ وقت سابقه قضایی به اون صورتی که در یک نظام قانون هست، یعنی این رول آف لو. در ایران رول آف لو نیست. در ایران اون چیزی که ولی فقیه بگه بالای قانونه، حتی بالای قانون اساسی. اسمش گذاشتن حکم حکومتی. کسی هم که به عنوان رئیس قوه قضاییه انتخاب میشه، اون میگه من اومدم اوامر ولی فقیه رو اجرا بکنم. و اولین وظیفه‌ش هم میگه مبارزه با دشمنان انقلاب. یعنی هر کسی که با جمهوری اسلامی مخالفت بکنه، این به عنوان دشمن جمهوری اسلامی. کسی هم که بخواد به عنوان وکیل دادگستری از اون دفاع بکنه، این رو هم به عنوان کمپلیس اون، به عنوان معاون اون، به عنوان شریک جرم اون میدونن. برای اینکه نسرین ستوده دیگه 2 سال 3 سال تو زندان نمونه، 12 سال تو زندان بمونه، یا تا این مدت نسرین ستوده در زندان بمیره، یا اینکه اینقدر ناتوان بشه که بعد از اومدن از بیرون از زندان دیگه نتونه دفاع کنه.
Yes.
و الان من به عنوان یک کسی که 60 ساله با حقوق سر و کار داره میگم من نگران سلامتی نسرین هستم، چون بر اثر اعتصاب غذاهای متوالی که نسرین هم در زندان اول و هم در این زندان کرده، الان نسرین دچار ناراحتی قلبی هست.
Yes.
و با توجه به اینکه در زندان قرچک هم هستش و ما واقعا نمیدونیم که نسرین در روزهای آینده، در ماههای آینده از نظر وضع سلامتی چه وضعیتی خواهد داشت.
Well, we heard the news yesterday. I don't know if I'm assuming you heard that she is actually refusing to take her heart medication. Do you know anything personally about her current health?
نه، ما فقط میدونیم که گفتند که الان میخوان پرونده پزشکی نسرین رو بفرستن به کمیسیون پزشکی. کمیسیون پزشکی هم بالاخره زیر نظر مقامات امنیتی هست. آیا بعد از اون اجازه میدن که نسرین، یعنی حداقل نسرین رو برای یه مدتی آزادش میکنن که اون بتونه در بیرون از زندان خودش معالجه کنه، یا اینکه نه 2 مرتبه او رو به بیمارستان منتقل میکنن، چند روز اونجا نگه میدارن مثل آخرین بار که چند هفته پیش اتفاق افتاد، و بعد هم 2 مرتبه برمیگردونن به زندان. اون در حال 12 سال زندان برای یک وکیل دادگستری، یعنی اینکه در حال به شیوه های متوسل بشن که گفتم برای همیشه یا او در زندان بمونه و در زندان بمیره، یا اینکه اگر هم بعد از 12 سال از زندان آزاد بشه دیگه نتواند به کارش که دفاع از مظلومان هستش 2 مرتبه ادامه بده.
When you say there's no judiciary system, دستگاه قضایی نداریم. Part of the paradox at work here, part of the heartbreaking contradiction here is that Nasrin Sotoudeh herself, like you, is a lawyer committed to law. So how do we make sense of even lawyers doing their job in a place that doesn't really respect law?
اولا در ایران دیگه کاهن وکلا مستقل نیست. دیگه کاهن وکلا یک NGO نیست. یک non governmental organization. یعنی چی؟ یعنی کسایی که بخوان عضو هیئت مدیره، یعنی بار اسوسییشن ایران داشته باشن، اینها رو باید وزارت اطلاعات اول صلاحیتشون تایید بکنه، به همون صورتی که در مورد مجلس قانونگذاری است. بارها که وکلایی که از متهمای سیاسی دفاع می‌کردن خواستن برن تو هیئت مدیره، کاهن وکلا مثل عبدالفتاح سلطانی نگذاشتن. بنابراین شبکه‌های امنیتی است که باید بگن یک وکیلی صلاحیت داره اصلا توی بورد وکلا بره یا نره. خب من حقوقدان میگم، من واقعا با نهایت تأسف میگم در ایران دیگه ما کاهن وکلای مستقل نداریم. چرا؟ برای اینکه گفتم 17 سال کاهن وکلا رو بستن. تمام ما وکلای دادگستری، یعنی وکلایی که خیلی شناخته شده بودیم، دادگاه انقلاب پروانه وکالت ما رو باطل کرد، آقای محمدی گیلانی. بعد هم شروع کردن به تصفیه وکلا. تمام کسانی که در حال به هر صورتی به عنوان ضد انقلاب بودن اینها رو تصفیه کردن. وکلایی که در ارتباط با رژیم گذشته ممکن بود یه اتهام‌هایی باشه اونها رو تصفیه کردن. وکلای غیر مسلمان، وکلای بهایی، تمام اینها رو تصفیه کردن و یک قانون وکلای 17 سال بعد به وجود آوردن به این صورتی که الان هست. بنابراین در ایران دیگه شغلی به عنوان وکالت که اون وکیل آزاد باشه دیگه وجود نداره. کاهن وکلا هم مثل قوه قضاییه جمهوری اسلامی متاسفانه.
Ali Lahiji, when you say they sentenced her to 38 years, they're going to keep her in prison for at least 12 years, and there's lashes and imprisonment, and you say that their reasons behind that will be to either, if God willing this won't happen, but either she dies in jail or that she just becomes irrelevant because she's taken away from the public stage for so long. it occurs to me that that's not working for them. And I want to ask this question of everybody on this program today, but how is the regime weighing the costs of keeping Nasrin Sotoudeh detained? I mean, in a sense, it would seem prudent, given that she has become an international cause célèbre, given that she has become somebody that people know of, given that she has become a symbol, that even for Machiavellian reasons, they would want to release her and think that she can do less harm than when she is in prison. Why keep her detained?
ببینید در اکتبر سال 2012 پارلمان اروپا جایزه ساخاروف رو به نسرین و جعفر پناهی داد.
بله.
نسرین اون موقع زندان بود، جعفر پناهی هم از زندان نبود ولی اونم در حال نمیتونست سفر بکنه. بنابراین من به عنوان وکیل و دوست نسرین ستوده به پارلمان اروپا رفتم. دختر جعفر پناهی هم از طرف پدرش بود و اونجا خب جایزه ساخاروف رو ما نگرفتیم، فقط دیپلمش رو گرفتیم. ولی در ملاقاتی که اون موقع با توجه به اینکه ما آخرهای دوره احمدی نژاد هستیم، هنوز سانکشن ها و در حال محدودیت های روی شورای امنیت روی ایران هست و ایران فقط مشغول گفتگو با اتحادیه اروپا است، بلکه بتونن یه راه حلی پیدا کنن و خلاصه اتحادیه اروپا براشون خیلی مهم بود.
بله.
اون موقع قرار بود یه گروهی از اتحادیه اروپا برن به ایران و آقای مارتین شولز رئیس پارلمان اروپا به من گفت که ما جایزه نسرین رو هم میدیم که ببرن ایران یا برن در زندان ملاقاتش کنن یا بیرون زندان. و آقای مارتین شولز به من قول داد که اگر این اجازه رو قبل از اینکه این هیئت به ایران بره ما نگیریم، من نمیگذارم. یعنی آقای مارتین شولز گفت من به عنوان رئیس پارلمان اروپا سفر اینها رو به ایران کنسل میکنم و این کار هم کرد. مدت‌ها این موضوع گذشت و چون میخواستن با اتحادیه اروپا به توافق برسن که بالاخره بعد رسید به مسئله توافق راجع به نوکلر و این چیزا، مجبور شدن اومدن بعد از 3 سال و 3 ماه با توجه به اینکه نسرین بیشتر از نصف زندانش کشیده بود نسرین رو آزاد کردن. ولی تمام این سالها، برای اینکه من میدونم ما با چه رژیم کریمینلی مردم ایران سر و کار دارن، تنها وسیله تماس من با نسرین ستوده از طریق اسکایپ بود. هفته یک بار ما با هم 1 ساعت 2 ساعت صحبت میکردیم. من وقتی بهش صحبت میکردم میگفتم خانم شما هنوز متاسفانه نمیفهمید، جمهوری اسلامی رو نمیشناسید، من از جمهوری اسلامی رو از شما بهتر میشناسم، مواظب خودت باش. اینها نمیگذارند یه وکیل دادگستری مثل تو که بتونه در ایران دفاع بکنه به کارش ادامه بده. من هر روز در انتظار این بودم نسرین ستوده 2 مرتبه دستگیر بشه، بالاخره دستگیر هم شد. خب موقعی که نسرین باز زندان بود، من اومدم به تورنتو، دانشگاه یورک به نسرین دکترا داده بود. من وقتی داشتم پیام نسرین که از داخل زندان فرستاده بود میخوندم، فقط اون روز گریه نکردم، خودم نگه داشتم که بتونم پیام نسرین رو بخونم. بدونید ما هرگز همدیگر فقط از طریق اسکایپ همدیگر دیدیم، ولی من فکر میکنم نسرین و ایستادگی نسرین، استواری نسرین it's not an example, it's an exception. یعنی توی ایران وکیلی مثل نسرین ستوده من نمیتونم بگم وجود نداره، ولی متاسفانه 10 نفر هم وجود نداره. میدونی؟ بنابراین حساسیتی که جمهوری اسلامی رو نسرین ستوده داره به حدی است که الان من نمیخوام همه اقداماتی که من دارم میکنم بگم، ولی به جایی نبوده که من طی این ماها نامه ننوشته باشم به رئیس پارلمان اروپا، به رئیس جمهور فرانسه فلان، که فقط یه کاری کنید که اجازه بدن نسرین بیاد بیرون خودشو معالجه کنه، 2 مرتبه برگرده زندان. تا حالا من نتونستم نتیجه بگیرم.
But when you وقتی که میگی که من میشناسم رژیم ایران رو میشناسم، جمهوری اسلامی رو میشناسم, did they maybe this is a naive a silly question, but did they not care that the New York Times is writing editorials about Nasrin Sotoudeh or the Amnesty International or the new documentary that's going to come out on a lot of people? Did they just not care about any of that?
حتما not care. جمهوری اسلامی یک قانون داره اسمش هست زور. و فقط هم زور میفهمه. بنابراین جمهوری اسلامی اولین کاری که با جامعه اینترنشنال کامیونیتی کرد چی بود؟ گروگانگیری بود. گروگانگیری یعنی الان شما ببینید در زندانهای ایران 10 کسانی هستن که دابل نشنالیتی دارن. تمام اینا گروگان جمهوری اسلامی هستن. ایرانیان امریکن، ایرانیان فرنچ، ایرانیان استرا استرا استرا. خب جمهوری اسلامی اینا رو نگه داشته و فقط با تمام دولت ها هم میدونن با چه رژیمی سر کار دارن، میدونن اینا استش هستن، اوتاژ هستن، میدونن اینا، ولی جمهوری اسلامی فقط زور میگه و فقط هم زور میفهمه. اون وقتی که مردم ایران قدرت داشته باشن که این رژیم رو ساقط کنن، اون وقت از جمهوری اسلامی دست برمیداره. ببینید ما تجربه رژیم شاه رو هم داریم دیگه. یه جامعه بسته رو وقتی بخواد یه خورده بازش بکنید، خب ممکنه سیل بیاد همه چی رو ببره. یعنی جمهوری اسلامی از روز اول با مردم ایران، با اینترنشنال کامیونیتی، با دنیا با زور برخورد کرده. الان هم همینه، با زور مونده. اگر جمهوری اسلامی زور رو بخواد ورداره، اگه دیس پنالتی رو بخواد ورداره، اگه تارچر رو بخواد ورداره، اگه ایمپریزنمنت رو بخواد ورداره، دیگه نمیتونه.
There's nothing left of this the regime, given that that's how it basically defines itself. Yes. Ahai Lahiji, I'm so grateful for the time that you've given us today. Let me one final question, and if I may, because you've known her for so long and you had those weekly Skype meetings and you know her in person and you represented her in Europe. Can you share something personal about Nasrin Sotoudeh, the person, something that you've come to know about her that you would want to share with people listening around the world?
ببینید من 55 سالی که I am as a lawyer. البته که کار نمی کنم، آدمی ریتایرد، ولی 55 سال من افتخار میکنم که یک همکار من اسمش نسرین ستوده. It's my honor. It's my honor. همین، چیز دیگه نمیتونم بگم و امیدوارم که تا زنده هستم، برای اینکه I am 80، من دیگه پیرمرد هستم، امیدوارم تا من زنده هستم ببینم که نسرین از زندان آزاد شده و سلامتی خودش رو بیشتر از این در خطر نیندازم.
Abdol-Karim Lahiji, I thank you so much for this today. I hope I see you soon, and I thank you for the words.
I hope so.
Khudafiz.
Khudafiz.
This is a Roqe special, the case for Nasrin. Well, we've heard about Nasrin Sotoudeh from a human rights, political, social, and journalistic perspective. Now, for an ethical view, my next guest is a world-renowned author, philosopher, and academic who was part of an international campaign to support Nasrin Sotoudeh with the PEN International organization a few years ago. Dr. Ramin Jahanbegloo is a political philosopher and presently the executive director of the Mahatma Gandhi Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies and the Vice Dean of the School of Law at Jindal Global University, Delhi, India. He has taught and lectured around the world and is the author of numerous highly acclaimed books. Ramin Jahanbegloo has had his own experiences as a political prisoner in Iran. In 2006, Ramin was arrested at Tehran airport and charged with preparing a velvet revolution in Iran. He was placed in solitary confinement for months and finally released on bail. Ramin Jahanbegloo joins me from Toronto today. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
Very nice to have you back on the show, Ramin. I'm okay, and yourself?
Thank you very much for having me again.
Listen, I know that the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh and the saga of Nasrin Sotoudeh is not far from your mind or heart. You've been working on this for years. I want you, if you can, to give us a perspective on the Nasrin Sotoudeh detainment from an ethical standpoint, which is your wheelhouse. But first, let me just ask, there have been thousands of political prisoners in Iran, or prisoners of conscience. You were one of them. Why is the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh particularly important?
Well, I think the other cases are important too, but the particularity of Nasrin Sotoudeh is that I think she has introduced two principal characteristics in terms of a civic actor and a supporter of human rights. And one of these aspects is truth seeking, I think, which is she has been re-evaluating the question of truth in Iranian society, and the other one being her criticism of institutionalized violence, especially the condemnation of death penalty. And I think this is very important because not every prisoner actually has been criticizing death penalty from inside the prison as she has been doing it, and not every prisoner has been actually trying to reevaluate the idea of truth in Iranian society. Now, and to be a little bit more clear, I think that Sotoudeh has been, through the past 10 years, she has been promoting an element of, I would call, civic maturity in Iranian society. And I think especially fighting against authoritarianism. But she also represents the image of a female human rights lawyer with a moral capital. We talk very often about social capital, human capital, but moral capital is also very important for civic actors and nonviolent activists. And I think Sotoudeh is somebody who has this moral capital because we can see that her social strategy, as you said correctly, is the primacy of the ethical on the political. She is, of course, a political prisoner, but she is not a typical political prisoner. She is what we call a prisoner of opinion, but she's also a lawyer. And she has a very clear idea of the ethical, I would say, in politics. And this is somehow what I would call a Gandhian moment of an Iranian prisoner.
A what moment?
A Gandhian moment.
A Gandhi moment. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, she fasted like Gandhi against the violence practiced in Iranian prisons. She actually uses the techniques of nonviolence against the establishment of death penalty in Iran. And all these are very important because you can see here a kind of novelty in the way she fights against oppression and against injustice. And I think that she has a very acute sense of solidarity with Iranian civic actors, with other jailed people. That's why she fasted, actually. She has an idea of nonviolence, certainly, as a mode of resistance against unjust laws. And without going too far, I'm not saying that Nasrin Sotoudeh is another Gandhi or MLK and Martin Luther King Jr., but I think that she has, even as a human rights lawyer, she knows that an unjust law is no law at all. So many times she opposes the idea of justice to the idea of law. And that's, I think, very new. In her sense.
Okay, let me stop you there because, not surprisingly, you've said a lot that is that I'd like to chew on. Let me try and deconstruct it one point at a time. Re-evaluating the concept of truth in Iran. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, truth-seeking about laws, about the oppression of law. And I think that one of the certainly the sins and the problems of Iranian society and especially Islamic regime is lying. And people like Sotoudeh, I think what they come out and they try to fight this the institutionalization of lie in Iranian society and especially in Iranian regime. So truth-seeking is very simply, as has been done by many activists in the past 50 years around the world, is just saying what should be said about human rights abuses, but also about the problem of oppression of women and many other aspects. And Sotoudeh, I think she has been a forerunner, one of the forerunners, but I think in today's Iran, maybe one of the forerunners in this aspect.
You talked a moment ago about using law to address justice. And I was saying this to Mr. Lahiji in the last half hour, who, of course, is a well-known attorney dealing with human rights issues himself for many years. When I asked him what to make of these laws in Iran, he said something like, well, there really isn't the rule of law in Iran. It's basically a sham. And one of the interesting paradoxes that emerges then is that Nasrin Sotoudeh, like many ethical lawyers, is actually very committed to the law and going by the book. So how to fight for and apply the law in a place that has a totally dysfunctional judicial system is a Rubik's Cube. How are we supposed to make sense of that?
Well, many people forget that somebody like Mandela or Gandhi, they were lawyers too. I mean, they studied law and they respected law, but somebody like Mandela was fighting against apartheid in the name of justice, and a law which has turned into its opposite. So I think it's the same question in Iran. I mean, what Sotoudeh is fighting against is the very essence of unlawfulness and illegitimacy of violence. I mean, that's why I say that there is a primacy of ethical on the political, because violence can be justified politically, and God knows that every day is leaders around the world, they justify the violence they use against their citizens, including the Iranian regime. But from a civic actor, from a human rights lawyer like Nasrin Sotoudeh, it's the most important is to show that this violence is illegitimate, morally illegitimate. The unlawfulness is morally illegitimate, and even if they try to justify it. So that's why I say that in her work you can trace a moral capital, what we call a moral capital, meaning that there's a level of a sense of responsibility about the present and the future of Iran. I mean, I think that people like Sotoudeh, what they teach future generations or younger generations today by just looking at them, is that they give a moral exemplarity, an example of an ethical person that they look and they say, oh, this person, she's different, she doesn't lie, she's fighting for justice and law, and she's not misusing law for her own benefits. So I think this is what makes her different from many others. The fact that she's very conscious about what she's doing, and that's why she returns to prison all the time, because she's fighting about this untruthfulness and indecency in Iranian society and Iranian regime in general, and tries to give this sense of responsibility, which I think goes very much with this passion of ethics, I would say, in Iranian society, which is very necessary.
Tell me about this commitment, Nasrin's commitment to nonviolence, and on a grassroots, on a granular level. How is that important in the context of contemporary Iran?
I think it's very important because we have two levels of teaching it. One level is the work I do personally, which is more of a work of an author or a theorist, and another is the work of civic actors like Sotoudeh and human rights lawyers like her. Is that they don't know as much about what has happened in the history of nonviolence, but they have a sense of this nonviolence, and they have a sense of solidarity with the sufferings of others. And again, I go back and I say a sense of justice, which is so important. One of the very important aspects of nonviolent democratic theory is that you consider the moral obligation to disobey unjust laws. This has been practiced all around the world in the past 100 years. And I think that Sotoudeh does the same thing, actually. She morally, she gives herself this moral expertise and moral action of disobeying unjust laws and trying to replace them by new virtues, I would say, and new values. And that's important. And you can see it in her action. I mean, she puts her life in danger, maybe to symbolize this new virtue, this new value of nonviolence, even in Iranian prisons.
She seems to have, Nasrin Sotoudeh has done a lot. She's done a lot in her life and as an activist and as a mother and as a et cetera. But as a lawyer, the areas she's focused on, children's rights, human rights, women's rights, and also capital punishment.
Yes.
which is something that's very important to you, I know.
Absolutely.
How important is the stand that she has taken opposing capital punishment in Iran? How important is that culturally, and how much is that one of the reasons why her name and what she is doing is resonating so much internationally?
I think it's her name is resonating more and more, and of course you have many other lawyers, human rights lawyers, the people like Lahiji for the past 40 years, 50 years of his life. He has been fighting against death penalty also, but there are two levels of doing that. Iranians and many others, they're doing it from outside the prisons, and some people like Sotoudeh are doing it from inside the prisons. So I think that you need more courage, more moral courage, I would say, to do it from inside the prison, because there's more pressure on you, and you might even be the victim of death penalty yourself, like Sotoudeh. But I appreciate actually her courage, and I think that this is very important, because once again, she's putting into question through the by showing the illegitimacy of the capital punishment. She's also giving a symbolic, gesture about how you can fight it from inside and not just from outside. So she gives us this feeling that she has this sense of responsibility, even as a prisoner inside the Iranian prisons.
I don't have the latest statistics in front of me, or I would have to check them, but I know that I've often cited the devastating reality that Iran is the number one country in terms of political executions in the world. Is fighting for an end to capital punishment a pipe dream in a place like Iran?
I think so, but going back to Sotoudeh, I think that what I like in her work, and I think is very important, is that she's not only fighting for the present of Iranian society, but also for the future generations. Because actually the abolishment of the capital punishment is not for today's Iran. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but maybe eventually next generation might see that, but they have to be ready for it, and they should not really repeat what has been done in today's Iran by asking for more blood or for more punishments through the death penalty. So I think that Sotoudeh is somebody who belongs also to the future of Iran, because she's fighting for this, against unlawfulness and illegitimacy of violence, not only in today's Iran, but also in the future of Iran.
Do you have any sense of what outside lobbying or collective action, what effect that can have on the Iranian authorities, the Iranian regime at this point? I have a flashback as I'm talking to you to 14 years ago, to 2006, where I was amongst those walking outside and campaigning for your release when you were detained in Iran, and there was many of us around the world, but certainly here in Toronto, who were protesting to try and hope that our voices would somehow be heard. I don't know if your release had anything to do with campaigns that happened outside of Iran, but when you're involved in something like the International Pen Campaign a few years ago, or people like Margaret Atwood are saying, this is the next Mandela, we need to support her. Do you think that has any actual effect on the regime?
Oh, immensely. I think it's very important. I think we should continue with the campaigns for all the prisoners, and especially those who are also well known, to other countries and outside people. But this is very, very important. It was important for my liberation, my freedom, but I think it's also very important for Sotoudeh and other prisoners. And we should certainly do that and try to mobilize ourselves. I'm not just talking about the Iranian diaspora, which I think is important to do that, but I think also in terms of all those who know Sotoudeh, for example, what we did with PEN Canada and the PEN International, and I've seen that in the past few months that in Paris and in other cities of the world, there has been campaigns for Sotoudeh, which not necessarily has been done by Iranians, but by French people or by others. And that's, I think, is very, very important. So
but what are the mechanics of that in terms of actually creating change? Not just in freeing Nasrin, but creating change, Ramin, because in the immediate, it doesn't seem to be working. I mean, she's back in jail. She's, you know, no hunger strike, no protestation, nothing seems to stop the regime on its mission to, I mean, they've charged her, they've convicted her, sentenced her to 38 years, and, you know, which is just absurd based on even the charges that they came up with. And so there seems to be some calculation there where you know, she's more valuable to them in prison than outside of it, even if she's becoming this cause célèbre around the world. So if she is to become a symbol like a Mandela, how would that actually create the winds of change that many would want in Iran?
If she becomes, I think, a symbol like Mandela, certainly she would be a wind of change. I'm not sure up to what point she can become a new Mandela. I mean, unfortunately, in today's world, you don't have too many Mandelas. I mean, we have a lot of prisoners around the world, but we don't have many Mandelas. Maybe because you know, people are more concerned with all the problems, including right now the pandemic, and less concerned about injustice around the world and the rise of populism and other things, and totalitarian regimes around the world. But I think that should not dissuade us to continue. I mean, those who really believe in, like myself, in being civic actors, in working, putting their pen in the service of, you know, justice, they have to do that. I mean, somebody like you also, I think, has to do that, because, you know, this ethics is part of our work. I mean, I think it's the most important part of our work. It's not really success, which is important. What has always been important for artists, writers, and others, I think it has been the work of ethics and the work of solidarity, and to fight for justice, not only in one's own country but also for others. I mean, I've been practicing that since the age of 17. So I think that it's very important to have to back people like Sotoudeh, because she's part of our future, as I said, and we should not lose them, and they need our support. And hopefully, I think that Iranian diaspora and others, they will support her.
Before I let you go, Ramin, when you think about cases like this, and the pressure that the authorities are not only putting on Nasrin but on her family.
Yes.
They recently arrested her 20-year-old daughter for what they said was some kind of dispute argument with a prison guard, and she's out on bail currently. But this is obviously devastating for the family, and they use the fear tactics with the family as well, as we know. You've been there. This had that effect on your family. You clearly would have an empathy for this situation. Where does your mind go when you think about Nasrin?
No, I think it's very difficult. Yes, I've been through that. My family has been through that. I think it's very, very difficult, and I really hope that she is not in a miserable situation right now, because they've changed her prison also. And she's in a worse prison right now, and I know that a lot of pressure is on her, and certainly I think that though the information doesn't get to you very easily, but eventually if you get to see your wife or your husband or somebody, a member of your family, and he or she tells you that, well, you know, people are fighting for you around the world, I think that recomforts you. I mean, it somehow gives you hope, and it shows you that you're on the right track. And that's very important for a prisoner like Sotoudeh and other prisoners. I mean, the fact that they know that they're not alone, and others are thinking about them and fighting for them, and somehow they're waiting for them to be free.
Ramin Jahanbegloo, as ever, I so much appreciate this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is a Roqe special, the case for Nasrin. We are on our ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity, coming to you on Telegram, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can link to any of those platforms, or all of them, and see our previous episodes at roqemedia.com. Well, we're honored to have our next guest join us, as she has been at the center of so much that is dear to Nasrin Sotoudeh's mission around democracy and justice. Mehrangiz Kar is a leading attorney, writer, and activist working towards the promotion of democracy, rule of law, and human rights within the framework of Islamic law. She was one of the first women attorneys to oppose the Islamization of gender relations following the revolution of 1979. Mehrangiz has been an active public defender in Iran's civil and criminal courts and has lectured extensively, both in Iran and abroad, on political, legal, and constitutional reform, promotion of civil society and democracy, and on dismantling legal barriers to women's and children's rights. In the year 2000, she was arrested in Iran without any guarantee of defense and sentenced to 4 years detention for taking part in an academic conference in Berlin on political and social reform in Iran. Mehrangiz Kar is now based in Washington, D.C., and she joins me from Toronto today. Hello.
Salam.
Salam. Merci que vaqtitun be ma dadin. Thank you so much for coming on the program. And I will ask the questions in English, but however you wish to respond in Farsi or English is totally fine.
خیلی متشکرم. منم از شما تشکر میکنم که من رو دعوت کردید به این مصاحبه.
Mehrangiz, unfortunately, it's not an easy subject matter for today. There have been thousands of political prisoners, as you know, in Iran. You were one of them, and devastating stories, all worthy of being told. But why is the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh particularly important?
دلایل زیادی داره که یکی از اونها این است که نسرین ستوده خیلی خوب شخص خودش تونسته موضوع مبارزه مدنی خودش رو در جهان بشناسونه، به این معنی که هر بار که در زندان بوده حرکتی داشته و از درون زندان پیامی رو به بیرون منتقل کرده که این پیام تناسب داشته با آرمان خودش و به همین دلیل توانسته این پیام به سراسر دنیا برسه.
And why do those messages, do you think, resonate so loudly with the international community in this case?
مهمترین پیامش این بوده که برای به دست آوردن اون زندگی عادلانه‌ای که مورد نظر و علاقه ایرانیان هست و شاید میشه گفت که یکی از انگیزه های انقلاب اونها بوده در سال 57، فقط با تن ندادن به تسلیم میسر میشه، به این معنی که باید مقاومت رو ادامه داد و بدون مقاومت مدنی چیزی در این حکومت تغییر پیدا نمیکنه.
Let me ask you a bit about how the authorities in Iran, the regime, the rule of law, in as much as we could call it that, deals with situations, with imprisonment, with situations like this. One of them is to implicate the whole family. There's a new documentary about Nasrin, and in it, the writer and human rights activist Taqi Rahmani says dictators and governments benefit from putting families under pressure. And so we've recently heard about the arrest of Nasrin's 20-year-old daughter, Mehraveh, for an alleged argument or dispute with a prison guard. Does it surprise you that such tactics are being employed?
حقیقتا نه، برای اینکه خود من که یک زمانی گرفتار این دستگاه‌های قضایی و انتظامی ایران بودم این تجربه رو دارم، منتها در اون زمان ما امکاناتمون مثل حالا نبود، یعنی شبکه‌های اجتماعی وجود نداشت، ترس وجود داشت از علنی کردن مسائل و حتی به ما گفته میشد که اگر علنی کنید ما شما رو میکشیم. برای خود ما این اتفاق در خانواده ما افتاد، به این معنی که من هدف بودم، هدف سرکوب بودم و همونطور که شما گفتید به علت شرکت در یک کنفرانس و گفتن اینکه مثلا قانون اساسی جمهوری اسلامی باید تغییر بکنه. اما بعداً دختر بزرگ من قربانی بود، منتها اون رو هیچ کس ازش خبر نداشت جز خود ما. و بعد که من از کشور برای معالجه خارج شدم، همسر من سیامک پورزند تا حدی زیر فشار قرار گرفت که به طور کلی دیگه میشه گفت زندگی خانوادگی ما رو متلاشی کردن. بنابراین وقتی در جایی متوجه میشن که موضوع خیلی جدیه و بایستی به صورت خانوادگی سرکوب بشه اون فرد، اینا حتما این کار میکنن. بعضی وقتا کسی رو میکشن و بعد خانوادهش رو کاملا محروم نگه میدارن از اینکه دادخواهی بکنن و مرعوبشون میکنن، به این معنی که بهشون میگن مثلا اگر حالا یک پسر دیگه دارین، یک فرزند دیگه دارین، به همون قناعت کنین وگرنه اون رو هم از دست میدین.
So using the tactic of fear hasn't changed even when you've got somebody already in prison.
فقط علنی شده، قبلا علنی نبود ولی حالا یه امکاناتی به وجود اومده و به هر حال فعالان ایرانی هم تشخیص دادن که باید موضوع رو به هر قیمتی علنی بکنن. پس میشه گفت تکتیکیه که این تکتیک داره کار میکنه برای اینکه دادخواهی قربانیان در درون کشور اساساً یک موضوع غیر ممکنیه.
Let me ask you a question that you're perhaps best positioned to answer as much as anybody, and that is that to not only think of Nasrin as symbol or somebody active for human rights in Iran, but as a symbol of the strength of women in Iran. It has been said regularly now that the leading agents of social change, of activism in Iran are women. And in the case of Nasrin, we see one of Iran's most distinguished human rights lawyers as a woman, and women are at the forefront of human rights defenders in Iran. That's interesting in the context of Iran's patriarchal culture. What does this say to us about the women of Iran and their role in the broader struggle for basic political and civil rights in the country?
ببینید، بعد از انقلاب درسته که آزادی‌های اجتماعی از مردم سلب شد، ولی اولین حمله‌ای که حکومت جدید که هنوز هم حکومت نهادینه شده‌ای نبود و شخص آقای خمینی هدفش رو حقوق زنان قرار داد. یعنی حقوقی که تا اون لحظه زنان به دست آورده بودن پیش از انقلاب. یعنی به جای اینکه به علت مشارکت وسیع اونها در انقلاب به زنان چیزی بده، از زنان همه اون چیزهایی را که در دوران پیش از انقلاب از نظر قانونی به دست آورده بودن اونها را هم ازشون گرفت. خب به علاوه آزادی‌های اجتماعی که مثلا حق انتخاب پوشش بود که سالیان سال بود که زنان ایرانی این حق را داشتن و حجاب رو به صورت اجباری بر زنان تحمیل کرد. در نتیجه میشه گفت که هم نخستین حمله به حقوق زن بلافاصله بعد از انقلاب اتفاق افتاد و هم ایجاد یک اپوزیسیون مدنی، اولین اپوزیسیون مدنی در ایران رو زنان به وجود آوردن، زیرا که در برابر حجاب اجباری نه فقط در تهران بلکه در سراسر ایران ایستادن و متاسفانه هنوز این ایستادگی اونجور که باید شرح تاریخی داده نشده، چون فقط در تهران نبود، حتی در شهرستانها بعضی از دانش آموزان، بعضی از پرستاران کشته هم شدن در این راه. بنابراین باید گفت که علت این که میبینیم در حال حاضر هم تعداد اکتیویست ها و فعالان برای دموکراسی خواهی، برای هر گونه تغییر زنان هستند، این است که حکومت سرکوب رو با زنان شروع کرد، سلب آزادی های اجتماعی رو با زنان شروع کرد و ادامه داد تا الان که ما داریم با هم دیگه حرف میزنیم. میشه گفت که این اعتراض و نارضایتی به صورت نسلی، یعنی از نسل من منتقل شده به نسل نسرین ستوده، از نسل نسرین ستوده منتقل میشه به نسل مهراوه و همینطور میشه گفت که یک مبارزه تاریخی نسلی شده برای زنان و زنان ظرفیت سیاسی تغییر پیدا کردن و به همین دلیل است که حکومت نسبت به کمترین حرکت سیاسی اعتراضی زنان خیلی حساسه و متوجه شده که بهتر اونا رو اصلا در زندان ها هم از یکدیگر جدا نگه داره تا به هم نپیوندن.
Well, let me ask you then how they do that in particular, using the law or the law as it's applied, which I have trouble understanding. We just had Abdol-Karim Lahiji on, and he basically said there really isn't a law. It's so haphazard in terms of the way it's applied. But let me ask you about how it is applied to women and how to try to make sense of it. One of the charges that Nasrin Sotoudeh has been convicted on is encouraging prostitution. I was trying to get my head around this to even understand where that would come from. I'm guessing this is connected to her support of women not wearing the hijab in public. So where exactly in Sharia law does it say that that is tantamount to prostitution, or does it?
من اسلام شناس نیستم، ولی تا اون اندازه‌ای که میدونم اصلا ما همچین حرفی در اسلام نداریم، نه در متون اسلامی به صورت صریح داریم و نه در تفاسیری که فقیهان دیگری غیر از فقیهانی که الان در جمهوری اسلامی خب مقام دارن، پول دارن، همه چیز دارن، از اسلام ارائه میدن. حجاب یک توصیه است در قرآن و بسیاری از فقیهان هم این را قبول دارن، ولی متاسفانه فقیهانی که رادیکال نگاه میکنن به زن، اینها تفسیرهای دیگری از حجاب به دست میدن و میگوین که توصیه نیست بلکه یک امر قهری و اجباری. اما این که بی بند و باری باشه، کسی که میگه حجاب اجباری درست نیست یا کسی که ایستادگی میکنه مثل نسرین ستوده یا همه ما در پرونده هامون در نظام امنیتی ایران این رو داریم که ما میخواهیم بی بندوباری غربی رو در ایران اشاعه بدیم، فحشا رو در ایران اشاعه بدیم. کما اینکه حتی از شوهر من خواستند در ضمن اقاریر اجباری، یعنی القا کردن بهش، مجبورش کردن که در برابر دوربین‌های صدا و سیما بگه که همسر من مهرنگیز کار میخواست بی بندوباری غربی رو در کشور اشاعه بده. این یک امر خوددرآوردیه، یک موضوعیه که اصلا واقعیتی در اسلام به نظر من تا اونجایی که من حرفای اسلام شناسا رو شنیدم یا خوندم وجود نداره. اینا خودسرانه تفاسیر فقیهانیه که به حکومت رسیدن و بسیار منفعت میبرن از این حکومت.
Mehrangiz, with respect to the hijab issue, Nasrin Sotoudeh has said, as long as it is in their hands, the Iranian authorities, the regime, to decide one day the hijab is compulsory or one day we can remove it, our decisions will always depend on them. But if we succeed through our efforts to gain our freedom of choice of clothing, it will be permanent freedom. Can you explain what you think she means by that?
ببینید حجاب وقتی که اجباری باشه، من به حجاب زنانی که دلخواه خودشون حجاب رو انتخاب میکنن احترام میگذارم، ولی وقتی که اجباری باشه یک نمادی است از سلطه، نمادی است از سلطه کسی که اون حجاب رو مجبور کرده زن داشته باشه. ممکنه که حالا این اجبار از طرف شوهر باشه، خب بازم میشه گفت نشانه سلطه شوهر بر زن. حالا اگر که حکومت به جای شوهر این کار کرده باشه یا به جای برادر فرض بکنید یا افراد مرد خانواده، باز مفهومش اینه که حکومت سلطش بر اون زن خیلی زیاده، یعنی بیشتر از شهروندان مرده. پس میتونه سمبولیک به صورت نمادین وقتی که حجاب اجباری اعلام بشه از طرف یک حکومتی، مفهومش این باشه که زن شهروند مساوی با شهروند مرد نیست و حقوقش هم نمیتونه مساوی باشه با حقوق مرد. این در این باره البته سخنان و تأکید نسرین صحیحه و موضوعی است که ما همه بر سر اون توافق و اجماع داریم.
You know, an area of Nasrin's advocacy that has generated, you might say, the most adverse reaction by the regime's judiciary is her work in representing victims of child abuse. Nasrin and her fellow attorney Giti Pourfazel, who is also in prison now, were summoned numerous times on complaints made by suspected or even convicted child abusers, and also by the judiciary for speaking out about these cases. Shouldn't the regime be supporting child advocates? I mean, that seems like a basic kind of thing. How do we make sense of that?
دولت ایران کنوانسیون حمایت از حقوق کودک رو دولت جمهوری اسلامی ایران امضا کرده در دهه 70 ایرانی، ولی به هیچ کدوم از بندهای اون و تعهدات اون مثل همه تعهدات بین المللی پایبندی نداره. هم خانم پورفازل گیتی و هم نسرین ستوده و هم دیگر فعالان حقوق زن و حقوق کودک بسیار نگران هستند از قوانینی که در ایران وجود داره، چون همونطور که میدونید منبع قانونگذاری در این نظام سیاسی شریعته و بر پایه اون اینها سن فرض بفرمایید ورود زنان به مسئولیت کیفری رو 9 سال هجری قمری که میشه تقریبا 8 سال و نیم شمسی قرار دادن و سن ورود پسران به قلمرو مسئولیت کیفری رو 15 سالگی. حالون که ما هرگز این قوانین رو پیش از انقلاب نداشتیم. سن ورود به مسئولیت کیفری 18 سالگی بود و برای دختر و پسر اصلا نباید تفاوت داشته باشه در هیچ سیستمی، ولی متاسفانه این یک مورد اجحاف به حقوق کودک. موارد بسیار زیاد دیگری هم وجود داره، مثل اینکه پدر میتونه بچه‌شو بکشه بدون اینکه مجازات بشه و بسیاری یا تنبیه میتونه بکنه در حد قانون میگه در حد متعارف و خب در حد متعارف رو ما چجوری میتونیم بفهمیم یعنی چی؟ یه وقتی میشه شلاق زدن، یه وقتی میشه خب حالا اصلا زیر تنبیه کشته بشه اون بچه، بازم چون پدره یا جد پدری مجازاتی نداره، در حالی که مادر فقط باید عزادار باشه و هیچ گونه در این موضوع حقی نداره. خلاصه وضعیت حقوق کودک به هیچ وجه بهتر از وضعیت حقوق زن نیست، منتها خب کودک هنوز قدرت اونو نداره، در وضعیتی که قدرت اونو نداره که با صدای بلند حرف بزنه و اکتیویست بشه و از این وضعیت ابراز نارضایتی بکنه.
Mehrangiz, you're a lawyer yourself. You've been a tireless campaigner for human rights and promoting democracy in Iran. You've been imprisoned yourself. You know that sometimes it seems as though this regime over the last 4 decades is sensitive to international attention, or seems to react and take heed when there is a global concern. Why do you think, in the case of Nasrin Sotoudeh, that is becoming such an international concern, that to the extent that people are calling her the Iranian Mandela, or that the New York Times is writing editorials about this? Why do you think the regime continues to keep her in prison rather than just releasing her in the hopes that she can do less harm to their reputation outside of prison?
من تصور میکنم برای اینکه روانشناسی نسرین ستوده دستشون اومده، یعنی متوجه شدن و آگاه شدن برای اینکه اولا نسرین ستوده وکیل دادگستریه و همونطور که شما میدونید در سراسر جهان، در سراسر کشورها، وقتی که اون فرد معترض وکیل دادگستری هست، نهایتاً ممکنه که رهبری یک اعتراض، یک انقلاب نرم، یک اعتراض گسترده رو بهتر بتونه به دست بیاره. و چون متوجه شدن که نسرین ستوده برای فعالیت‌های خودش تداوم قائله و آزاد هم که بشه به هر حال اون آرمان خودش رو باز هم دنبال میکنه، کما اینکه میدونیم چند بار نسرین آزاد شد، ولی نسرین بدون اینکه مرتکب جرمی باشه، بله، از زنانی که در خیابان بهشون میگن زنان خیابان انقلاب و رفته بودن روی یک بلندی هایی، گاهی یکیشون می ایستاد و توجه مردم رو به نافرمانی مدنی خودش جلب میکرد، وکالت اونا رو به عهده گرفت. این جرم نیست، ولی از نظر اون حکومت که بسیار حکومت اولا بگم ترسویه، بسیار میترسه از اعتراض مدنی و ثانیاً خیلی لجبازه و تابع هیچ یک از ضوابط و قوانین، نه داخلی خودشه و نه بین المللی، اینها وحشت به دلشون میفته و همونطور که فرض کنید نیویورک تایمز لازم نیست بنویسه، خود ما هم میدونیم، متوجه شدن که نسرین یک ظرفیته که میتونه برای ایجاد تغییر به کار بیاد و مردم رو دنبال خودش بکشه و یک کاریسما پیدا کرده و این کاریسما همون کاریسمایی است که در کشورها بعضی از وکلای دادگستری الان هم در دنیا میبینیم اگر تداوم داشته باشه کارشون پیدا میکنن و حکومت رو به چالش میکشن. به نظر من نسرین ستوده دارای یک ظرفیتی میشه که این ظرفیت رهبری است و جمهوری اسلامی از آغاز که روی کار اومده، هر شخص و شخصیتی رو که متوجه شده دارای ظرفیت رهبری هست، اون رو از بین میبره، نه اینکه حتما میکشه و بلکه کاری میکنه که از صحنه خارج بشه. فرض بفرمایید برای من میتونم بگم 4-5 سال پیش از این که من اصلا در کنفرانس برلین شرکت کنم، یک کسی به نام آقای حبیبی که منو میومد در دفترم بازجویی میکرد، یک روز با یک پیام خاص پیش من اومد و گفت شما همسر و 2 دخترتون بیایید به کمک ما از کشور خارج بشید، چون ما نمیتونیم شما رو تحمل کنیم و به شما سخت خواهد گذشت. گفتم چجوری؟ گفت که ما همه اسبابهای شما رو خودمون بک میکنیم، شیپ میکنیم، تمام هزینه هاتون رو میدیم و 6 ماه هزینه ماندن در خارجتونم میدیم. شما این رو قبول کنید وگرنه زندگی خوبی نخواهید داشت. من اون موقع خندیدم و به این مرد گفتم، روی صندلی دفتر وکالتم نشسته بودم، گفتم من این صندلی رو به همه دنیا ترجیح میدم. گفت من گفته باشم به شما میتونید به بهترین شکل ممکن زندگیتون رو، به شرطی که هر 4 نفرتون از کشور خارج بشید و حتی یکیتون در ایران نمونید. پس من فقط میخوام به شما اینو بگم که این رژیم کاری میکنه که اولا خود اون آدم وقتی که اولین بار از زندان آزاد میشه بره خارج. این کاریست که میکنه. حالا من فکر میکنم نسرین ستوده از تجربیات ما خیلی استفاده کرده، به این معنی که متوجه شده که اینها شدت میگذارن روی زندگی فعال برای اینکه تا بتونه زود از کشور خارج بشه. و حتی من از اون مرد پرسیدم، گفتم خب ما مثلا فرض کنید، با خنده البته، من از کشور خارج شدم، خب اونجا که میرم بیشتر حرف میزنم. گفت نه، من به شما بگم که برای اطلاعات و امنیت ایران شما 6 ماه دردسر درست میکنید، ولی بعد از 6 ماه شما مهره سوخته هستید و ما دیگه نه از شما صدمه میخوریم و نه دیگه اون دیسکی که مثلا یه دیسکی توی وزارت اطلاعات یا سازمان‌های امنیتی، سپاه پاسداران به نام فرض کنین مهرنگیز کار هست، اون دسک هم دیگه غیر فعال میشه و هم ما نجات پیدا میکنیم از شما، هم شما نجات پیدا میکنید.
But Nasrin has not shown much appetite for leaving. It's clear she intends to stay, and you're saying that they don't appreciate that, and that they would rather have her in prison.
بله، میخوام بگم که نسرین ستوده یک سنتزی از تجربه های پشت سرش که من هستم، خانم شیرین عبادی هست و خیلی های دیگه، و متوجه بوده که نباید اون خاک رو در هر شرایطی ترک بکنه و خیلی خوشحالیم ما که او نسل دیگری بوده، جوانتر بوده و از تجربه های ما بسیار خوب استفاده کرد.
It is so educational hearing from you. I thank you so much for taking the time today. If I can ask one final question, it would be just if you can reflect on beyond the law, beyond the heartbreaking nature of the situation, and beyond the regime even. What can you tell us in your dealings with her on a personal level about Nasrin Sotoudeh? What insight can you give us about her beyond this symbol and this lawyer that we've heard so much about or seen in the news?
من 2 احساس دارم. یک حس من بسیار حس بدیه و ناراحت میشم برای این اندازه رنج کشیدن زنی که من اون رو خیلی خوب میشناسم و یک وقتی که من اونجا کار میکردم و نسرین وکیل نبود، نزدیک بود محل کارش به من و صبح میومد و ما با هم دیگه قهوه میخوردیم و همون موقع میگفت که من میخوام وارد کارهای حقوق بشری بشم و بعد دیگه من در ایران نبودم. اما من خیلی خیلی متوجه اخلاق انسانی نسرین هستم، چون از نزدیک یک وقتی دوست بودیم با هم دیگه و البته اون نسل جوان بود. از یک طرف ناراحت میشم برای خودش، برای بچه‌هاش، برای مهراوه، ولی از طرف دیگه تصور میکنم که ما نیاز داریم به امثال نسرین و ای کاش ما در حال حاضر 10 تا نسرین داشتیم به جای 1 دونه نسرین درون کشور، منظورم هست. خب این منو خوشحال میکنه که هم ما داریم میریم به طرف به دست آوردن یک نیرو و ظرفیت رهبری از جنس زن و همین که خوشحالم میکنه که جهان دست کم این یک نفر رو خیلی خوب تونسته بشناسه و خیلی خوب داره معرفی میکنه. به هر حال رسانه ها همه دارن خیلی خوب به درستی دارن نسرین رو معرفی میکنن و من خیلی امیدوار هستم به آینده‌ای که این پتانسیل ها و ظرفیت های سیاسی زنان ایران که ناشی هست از سیاست های زن ستیز این حکومت یک روزی که نمیدونیم کی فرا میرسه کمک بکنه به تغییر مسالمت آمیز و مدنی در ایران.
Mehrangiz John, I thank you so much for your time today. I hope we get to speak again in the near future. I really appreciate you doing this.
من هم متشکرم. خیلی ممنون. خداحافظ. خداحافظ.
This is a Roqe special, the case for Nasrin. If you want to read some of our blogs at our website, Roqe Reads, just go to roqemedia.com, press Reads, and you can leave comments there as well. And find all of our platforms. Links to all of our platforms there at the website as well. My next guest is a scholar with the University of Ottawa and a visiting professor at Carleton University. Hossein Raisi practiced law in Shiraz for 20 years and served as a 2-term board member of the Fars Province Bar Association and was the founder and former head of the Human Rights Committee there for 8 years. He is also the founder of the Voice of Justice Legal Association in Shiraz. In his professional practice, Hossein has defended, as a pro bono attorney, political prisoners, journalists, and women and children who were sentenced to the death penalty. In 2012, Hossein Raisi relocated to Canada to escape undue pressure from the Iranian government. Since then, he has been collaborating with human rights organizations in several countries regarding various issues, including Sharia law and human rights, the death penalty in Islamic legal systems, domestic violence, and global networks dedicated to protecting children. He has written and lectured extensively on these subjects, and right now, Hossein Raisi joins me from Ottawa, Canada today. Hello.
Hi, John.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me here.
I know cases of political prisoners and the detention of lawyers in Iran are not new for you. You know all about this. How do you see the Nasrin Sotoudeh situation over the last few years?
Unfortunately, Nasrin Sotoudeh is the example of how practice law in Iran, how people try to be a part of the justice and supporting human rights. She just practiced human rights and tried to be an independent lawyer to support human rights in Iran. And the authority, unfortunately, tried to push her back and push many lawyers back to practice justice and supporting human rights in general, and specifically because Ms. Sotoudeh has a voice and she's brave and has a voice for supporting society in some ways, and the authority has no accepted and pushed her back to practice human rights as Sotoudeh's way.
You know, I want to ask you about this because you're an expert on law in Iran and Sharia law. I want to ask you about how the authorities in Iran justify this. I mean, this special we're doing has been about Nasrin Sotoudeh as a person, as a human rights activist, as you say, as a symbol, but it's also about trying to understand the contemporary judiciary system in Iran. And most of the folks I've asked so far, like Mr. Lahiji or Natalie Amiri, have basically suggested Iran is lawless, or at least that it does not even observe the laws that it has. Let me ask you, how does the regime legitimize legally locking up Nasrin Sotoudeh?
Actually, they don't care about the philosophy of the law and the legal philosophy of the legal system, as well as the rationalization legal system. They don't want to follow up modern ideas regarding the rational legal authority. They have their own legal classification, so-called Islamic legal system. Always they have referred to Article 4 of the Iranian Constitution, which says law must be adopted with the Shia Sharia law, Shia Sharia law. They are believed that they don't need to get legitimacy from the people. The authority considers legitimate legal sovereignty to belong to the divine Sharia. At the same time, they are trying to show that they have a democratic religious system. So most of the law are irrational and only people obey the law by force. For example, mandatory hijab law or prohibited drinking alcohol. And if we look at the Sotoudeh's case, everything is same as this because they don't want to practice the law to be and to be rational and to be legitimate.
But you mean I mean they don't even preserve the postulate. یعنی مثلا اصلا نمیخوام نشون بدن که مثلا we have a reason for doing this for the sake of the Iranian people. They don't want to present a rational kind of argument for this is why we're doing this, even if it's a bogus one.
Yeah, if we look at the trial of the Ms. Sotoudeh, she denied to be present in the trial because she does believe the authority and the legal system is not legitimate, and they charge her because she just practiced law, just follow up the law and justice. And yes, they try to show that the law and legal system is working well. But regarding the Nasrin's case, no, they don't care exactly about everything because they just shows up something that, we have this verdict against her, we have this trial, but her lawyers did not access to the actual facts and law, and the court did not care about everything lawyers brought to the court.
One of the charges that Nasrin Sotoudeh has been convicted of is enabling prostitution. Now, I certainly don't know much about Sharia law. I know nothing about Sharia law. But really, does it actually say in Sharia law that defending those who have chosen to not wear the hijab is enabling prostitution?
Of course not. Actually, this is an interpretation of the authority and the government of the Islam, and they try to have their own interpretation of the Sharia and put it in the law, and they codified some part of the Sharia as their own interpretation, I believe, and they try to say, okay, yes, if you, Ms. Sotoudeh, supporting ladies that they took off their hijab in a public, it means you supporting a kind of corruption and the spread some kind of prostitution. This is actually very vague interpretation of the even Iranian law and Sharia law.
You were, as I said in the introduction, the head of bar associations in Iran, legal associations. You've practiced law there for many years. One thing that becomes clear in the story of Nasrin Sotoudeh is that, she's a lawyer, she's an attorney, and she wants to be committed to the word of the law. How do we square that circle with an attorney in Iran who wants to be committed to following law if law is not respected by the courts and authorities?
Actually, in Iran, the authority tried to push a lawyer in a way that they wanted. And actually, they just accepted practicing law in their own way. And they put Nasrin and some more human rights lawyer in a jail to address some threaten to the more lawyers not to be part of the supporting human rights, be against the death penalty, being against the LGBTQ's rights and the minorities, religious minority rights. And actually, this is a symbol for supporting human rights. At the same time, this is a kind of cases to address through the authority for the more lawyers to stay out from practicing human rights and supporting justice of people.
It's a fear tactic, suppression tactic.
Of course, yeah.
Mr. Raisi, before I let you go, why do you believe that they are not releasing Nasrin Sotoudeh, despite the fact that she's clearly not good for the Iranian regime or the authorities in terms of international publicity she gets whilst being detained? When she goes on the hunger strike or anything that happens with her in prison becomes news internationally. And none of us would ever want her to die in jail, but one can only imagine that she would become even more of an international symbol if she did. Why don't they release her?
Because, in my view, I think she's in a jail because she has influence on the society. She is a hero, not only for the lawyer. She's a hero, she's a brave human rights lawyer to support women's rights in Iran, to support a movement against the death penalty, and supporting human rights in all ways, especially on women's rights. And the authority knows that if she gets released, she has her own influence in many ways in the society.
Hossein Raisi, I thank you so much for your time today. خیلی خوشحالم که با شما حرف بزنم و I thank you so much for the time you've given us.
It's my pleasure و منم خیلی ممنونم که به این موضوع مهم میپردازید.
خداحافظ.
خدا نگهدار.
The sounds of Sina Batai doing our Roqe theme there on the Santour. We're grateful to him for providing some of the music there. Our final guest on this Roqe special, The Case for Nasrin, is an American film producer, director, writer, and illustrator. Jeff Kaufman has been the producer, director, and writer behind documentaries like Every Act of Life, The State of Marriage, Father Joseph, and Education Under Fire. He has also been the man behind a number of short films for Amnesty International and programs for the Discovery Channel and the History Channel. Jeff has contributed illustrations to The New Yorker, The Los Angeles Times, and The New York Times, and he has written and illustrated several children's books and hosted daily radio shows in Vermont and Los Angeles. Jeff is the director, producer, and writer of the new documentary, Nasrin, which we've mentioned a few times on this program and which has been getting a lot of attention. And right now, Jeff Kaufman joins me from Los Angeles today. Hello, sir.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Congratulations on this documentary, Jeff. Thank you for doing this interview and for making the doc. It's quite remarkable. I mean, first and foremost, in the access to Nasrin Sotoudeh and the fact that you have captured so many significant personal and legal moments in the last decade or so in her life. How did this come about? What's the genesis of this? Where did this start?
Well, things cycle back in different ways, but I guess the most recent cycle was that I did an earlier film with Amnesty International about the persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran. And if you know the way Baha'is are treated in that country, it's really, really brutal. Many have been killed. If you're a young Baha'i, say you're the top of your class in high school and you're, acing the science tests and everything like that, you can't go to college and you can't get a job. And it's just horrendous. So we did this documentary about the Baha'i faith in Iran and the underground university system they set up. And one of the stories I heard from a number of people was how often Muslim neighbors, Muslim friends would put themselves at enormous risk to help members of the Baha'i community, smuggling them into college, helping them start a business. Just remarkable stories. And for me, that was very nourishing at a time when people in this country were demonizing Islam and trying to go to war with Iran. It was very humanizing. And no one has been a greater champion of supporting people in need and religious minorities than Nasrin Sotoudeh. She's just a remarkable role model, not only for Iran, but for America and the world as well. So come 2016, when we were finishing up our last film, we reached out to Nasrin through mutual friends, kind of explained a vision we had for doing a documentary about her, and we kind of hit it off, and that was the genesis.
And you are not Iranian, right? You're not an Iranian masquerading as Jeff Kaufman with a different name, right?
No, I don't think I'm anything masquerading as Jeff Kaufman, but I think I am Jeff Kaufman.
I ask you that because, sorry to cut you off, but just parenthetically, sure. It was interesting to have an author named Andrew Scott Cooper on the show not too long ago talking about his book on the Shah. And he said, and I know that you clearly have insights into the divisions and the factionalism and the intra-Iranian community debates, etc. He said that he actually found it an advantage for him being a non-Iranian in terms of access to Iranians because you come with less baggage in a sense. Did you find that going into this?
I think anytime you make a documentary or probably write a book, you have to present yourself in a certain way to others and to yourself. I mean, I've done films about, the origins of the marriage equality movement and a priest in Haiti and jazz in Harlem in the 1930s. So each of those are quite different, but you really want to serve the people and the stories that you're encountering. But I had a special agenda. And when I say it was really a team effort. I work with my wife and producer, Marcia Ross, and, we have great people around us. But I had a special agenda in that I'd come to really respect the Iranian people and the Iranian culture and realize just what a rich and interesting society it is. And, there's a big disconnect between leaders of a country and the people. I hope people realize that about America. And so we wanted to also pay tribute to what life is really like in Iran. And so that is something about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to serve that as best as possible.
I'm sure you're not the first person who would have approached Nasrin Sotoudeh about doing a documentary. Tell me about the decision that Nasrin and her family made to grant access to you, to have cameras around, but then, of course, to have a film made.
Well, it's really quite remarkable when you think of the fact that especially for someone like Nasrin, who's so prominent and is a regular thorn in the side of her government, to walk around with cameras can get you arrested and can get the camera people arrested as well. So it was no small decision. I think we agreed quickly, like I said, on doing something that was, through Nasrin, a wider portrait of Iran, a wider portrait of the women's movement and the human rights movement in Iran, and really a sort of an appreciation of the arts in Iran, which is something that she loves. So we hit it off that way. And then it was just a question of trying to collect the forces to make the film. that was a remarkable collaboration with people in Iran who put themselves at risk to do this.
And Jeff, if I have this correct, was it because of your previous film that you're not? Are you persona non grata in Iran? Are you allowed to go to Iran?
I mean, I don't want to elevate my status too high, but I've done about 4 other films about Iran, and so it just was too risky.
You're on the radar. Yeah. So
but also, if you show up with a big Hollywood crew and walk around with Nasrin Sotoudeh, you're not going to get, intimate access.
Right, could be problematic. Yes. So if I understand this correctly, you were captaining the ship along with your partner from the States, and you had people in Iran shooting at various moments and sending back the footage to you. Is that the way it worked?
Yes, and I don't want to imply that I was sort of telling them exactly what to get. I mean, there were wish lists that I had and that I would share, but also it's just real life taking place. So people like Nasrin went to a bookstore to buy a birthday present for someone, and that may seem like a small thing, but the bond between that country and other countries is pretty real when you see that, or going to an avant-garde art gallery, So sometimes it'd be just these wonderful surprises. But also, while we were doing the film, a major movement in the women's rights movement broke out in Iran. It was called the Girls Revolution.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that was something that we got to witness firsthand, as in part Nasrin ended up defending one of the key protesters in that movement.
And I guess Hosseini. But
exactly.
So I'm still curious about how, again, part of the reason the film is so riveting, and I hope everybody will get to see it eventually, is that it is the access to very personal and in some cases quite devastating moments. I mean, I'm thinking about the family collapsing outside of when they hear that their kid has been executed, and we're seeing the raw footage of these people crying and dealing with this. Those kind of moments, especially when they deal with Nasrin or Reza Khandan, her husband, why do you think they agreed to allow the cameras to be on and see them in their vulnerable moments, in these difficult moments?
I think like Nasrin, they realized that the best way to make change is to have your voice heard, and to have someone who cares about respecting that voice and amplifying that voice is really important. One of the things that was remarkable to me is that we were able to film with a wide variety of people, some famous like the great filmmaker Jafar Panahi, others less so, like a gentleman who helped raise bail for Nargis Hosseini when she was in prison. And they all signed a release. We gave them a standard Western, 3-page release translated into Farsi. They knew what was at stake appearing in the film, but they shared Nasrin's commitment to not being silenced and to trying to break down some of these barriers.
It's incredible. Jeff, how up to date are you on what is happening with Nasrin? I mean, we've just heard about her being moved to a different prison. We heard about her yesterday refusing to take her heart medication after another hunger strike. Do you have any insight into what's happening?
Well, we're just talking often with her husband, Reza Khandan, who I have to say is just one of the most remarkable people. Marcia Ross, again, a producer of the film, referenced that the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary, and she said that Reza is the Marty Ginsburg to Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right.
That person who is just as smart and just as dedicated and just as passionate about rights, but loves their wife and will do anything to serve her cause. And, Reza is just remarkable. And you can only imagine what he's been going through, as Nasrin's been in prison and his own daughter, was recently picked up and interrogated herself. And he's out on bail for, facing 6 years in prison himself. So what we've heard is basically what you heard. We've been talking quite a bit. She was transferred from Evin prison to Garshak prison, which is about 30 miles outside of Tehran. It's been called the worst prison in Iran, which, since Evin prison is one of the worst prisons in the world, you can only imagine.
Yeah.
And what they did was they told Nasrin, we're going to take you to the hospital so you can get some tests and some treatment. They took her down to a car, they put her in the car, and then instead of taking her to the hospital, they took her to Garshak prison. And that's a kind of psychological torture.
Yeah.
And recently, this is public knowledge, some individuals with the government came to see Nasrin on Friday to quote unquote negotiate with her, and where that's actually going to go, we don't know. But we hope that the public pressure that's really going from all over the world will keep the authorities aware that it's important to treat her right. But her health is really, really fragile. She does have a heart condition, and she is using her cards to get to the hospital and to get some treatment or to go home. And we have to hope that the authorities realize how devastating it will be if they don't treat her right.
Well, one of the things that the authorities do, as you know, and as you explore somewhat in the documentary, is apply pressure on the family and to psychologically affect the prisoner. So, as you just mentioned, Nasrin's 20-year-old daughter, Mehrangiz, was recently arrested and temporarily detained. Can you tell us what happened with that? Why?
Yes, I want to make sure I only say what I should say. But back in August, when Nasrin was in prison the first time, between 2010 and 2013, Mehrangiz was just a young girl at the time, and she was harassed by the government and banned from travel. And that was one of the reasons why Nasrin went on a hunger strike at that time. And again, just, imagine picking on the kid of an imprisoned mother.
Right.
It's just, ridiculous and horrible. So back in August, the authorities, 4 security officials showed up at Reza and Nasrin's apartment, house, and at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I understand, and wanted to take Mehrangiz away for questioning. My understanding is that Reza said, no, you can't take her. I'll drive her to Evin prison and you can talk to her then, so he could escort her. He went with her to Evin. They apparently interrogated her for about 5 hours without her father being allowed to be in the room. And Mehrangiz, she's an art student and she's a very shy young woman, but very smart. But our understanding is that, like mother, like daughter, she's tough too. And so they accused her apparently of insulting a guard who was overseeing Nasrin, as if some big tough guard at Evin prison can't, handle a angry word from a 20-year-old woman.
Right.
And at any rate, they just brought her back into Evin courtroom on Monday, and we're hoping that they'll drop the charges, but that's not official yet.
When you talk about her being tough like her mom, Nasrin, is certainly tough. At one point in the documentary, there's someone who suggests to her that she should have a bodyguard. They say, look, it's time for you to be followed with a bodyguard. And she says, no, I don't need one. It's in the context of everything that has happened to her and continues to happen with her. It's an exceptional moment of courage that she shows. Tell me about what you've learned about Nasrin Sotoudeh's courage.
Yeah, but can I mention something else about that moment, which I'm so glad you mentioned? Because you'll notice that not only did she say, no, I'll be fine, but she broke out into a big smile,
Yes,
and that's one of the things that's remarkable about Nasrin is that, she's, 5 feet tall, 5'2", a small woman, but just, incredibly tough. But then she also has a smile that could light up a room. She's got both of those. And that makes her a great person to make a film about. But it also shows, I think, her depth and her breadth and just, her charm. She's been on the front line in many ways for a long time. And there's a scene that we found from an unusual process of Nasrin actually in Revolutionary Court defending Sharon Abadi, who was out of the country.
Yes.
And talking down a judge and talking down a very obnoxious prosecutor who's still in power now.
Sharia Badari, yeah.
And he's saying, oh, you're just defending Americans and homosexuals and Baha'is, and thugs, and, as if all those things were the same or bad. And she just won't take it, And I think that's what's keeping her going now. She's got a very strong anchor about what is right and what she wants to do. And let me say one more thing, if you don't mind. Because recently, in the middle of the hunger strike, which lasted 46 days, she got an award from
the recent one.
Yes, the recent one.
There's been more than one. Yes, yeah.
Yes, there has. This last one was just devastating. But in the middle of that, she received this important award from a German Justice Association. And she didn't she sent a friend to accept it, but she didn't do it on behalf of herself. She did it on behalf of 4 people in Iran on death row. And that's Nasrin. She always tries to seize the moment and use it on behalf of someone else.
You would have some sense of this, especially as someone who's presided over this documentary, and I'm going to ask you about the reactions you've been getting to the doc so far in a moment. But we just spoke with Ramin Jahanbegloo, and he's using names like Gandhi and MLK and Mandela. Do you think that Nasrin Sotoudeh, first of all, why do you think she's become such a symbol for the international community in and amongst many political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Iran that, of course, also deserve attention? But do you see her becoming a symbol on the international stage that way?
I can't project what the future will lead to, or what Nasrin's intentions will be. But I think the reason she's being mentioned in terms of Martin Luther King or Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, or for me, the great Representative John Lewis, is that she is that kind of person. Lots of times I've known a lot of politicians, and lots of times people who do great things are not necessarily personally all that great or all that humane. And I'm not making Nasrin into, someone perfect. Her husband Reza says, hey, we're just average people. We're just regular people.
Right.
But, both of them have that depth of humanity that makes them really special. And so there's a good reason for her to be on that level. I often call her the Nelson Mandela of our time because I think she is, and others have said that as well. I had a chance to interview and work with John Lewis a couple of times.
Oh, wow.
The great civil rights leader.
Yeah.
One thing about John Lewis is he took his own experience fighting for African Americans in this country, and he realized it's universal. It applies to LGBTQ people. It applies to women's rights. If you're struggling for your rights, there's universality about that. And I think Nasrin sees it the same way.
Yeah, I mean, she is. I'm just thinking about John Lewis then now, and what he represented, and I guess still represents. One of the most remarkable things about Nasrin to me too is that this wasn't all some plan that she hatched from a young age to I'm going to become a famous lawyer and then be on the international stage. In fact, as we see in the documentary, she's working quite innocuously in a bank, right? And then kind of by happenstance decides to get a law degree and finds herself just wanting to need to speak out around injustice. But this isn't some Machiavellian plan that she has from early in life to take over the world.
No, and she's not going to take over the world, but she will improve it. But I think it applies. Obviously, I'm here in Los Angeles. We're facing an election that could change the fate of the world, and we hope it does. And so it's that door that opens up in anyone about what's my responsibility towards others. Right. And once you realize that you can make a difference and you should make a difference, how can you step back from that? So I think that's the direction that's led her life. And, she also is, she adores her children and she wants to be with her children. And that sacrifice is just heartbreaking.
Jeff, I've asked this question a few times of the different guests today, but if she is such a symbol, just to get your point of view on it, if she is such a symbol for the international community and media outlets and are writing about her, talking about her. Your documentary is certainly, I think, going to make a quite a splash. It has already. Why do you think the regime is keeping her behind bars? In other words, what's the calculation there? Why not let her go so that she becomes less of a cause célèbre?
Well, why can Donald Trump not stand any criticism whatsoever? Because behind the bluff and the bully is someone who's very, very fragile. And the same thing can apply to a regime. I'm an American. I can't speak about, the psychology of the Iranian regime, but I think that they don't really represent their people. I think change has to come internally. It can't come from outside. But 60% of the Iranian people are under 30. And I would say that many of them would say that this regime does not represent their interests and their sense of direction and freedom. And therefore, like other authoritative regimes, they find any challenge or even perceived challenge as sort of an existential threat. But of course, that's not what Nasrin is. Nasrin is a voice for democracy and respect of the law.
What has the reaction been like to this documentary so far, or perhaps what has surprised you about the reaction, if anything?
Sure. And let me just crashly say that you can find out more, obviously, about the film and also sign a petition on behalf of Nasrin Sotoudeh by going to the website, which is www.nasrinfilm.com. And that's a really good way to also send us a note and participate and keep being part of this process. I mean, it's strange when you work on a film for so many years and, you're sort of in the trenches and then it's out there in the world. And unlike any other film we've done, we didn't tell anyone we were doing this until we released it. So, we raised all the money in secret and all that. It's gratifying that it's brought together a lot of groups that sometimes work disparately, but for good cause together. There's a lot of dialogue that's happening now. And we just, I was talking to Reza, Nasrin's husband, about a week ago, and saying, what's the most effective thing? I was having all these convoluted ideas about how we could make change. And he was saying, kind of simply, you just got to keep the pressure on. You got to keep attention on Nasrin and others like her. And so we feel this film and all the forums will do that.
I'm guessing that, sadly, Nasrin has not had a chance to see the film yet.
No, but she knows about it. I mean, she sent us, how do I say this? We've communicated about the film even since her incarceration. She knows it. It's important to her. It's really important to Reza.
Has he seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And what did he say?
Well, I don't want to look. It's very gratifying how he and family members feel about the film. He also just is totally moved by Olivia Colman's narration,
yes.
And he loves the song that Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flaherty wrote for the end credits that Angelique Kidjo, the great Angelique Kidjo, sings.
Yes.
And so those are things he references a lot, and he just knows that this is a good way to. Besides, I think that they're moved by the film, that this is a catalyst for getting the world community active on Nasrin's behalf.
Is the film going to have a wide release? I mean, what do you do in the time of COVID? Is it going to be on Netflix? Is a deal in place already?
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, the film festival world is bizarre anyway. But now we're having film festival screenings and university and organizational screenings, but, without actually being there ourselves. So there's a lot of ways to participate and go see the film. And again, you can find out through, NasrinFilm.com. There's Doc New York is going to be presenting the film starting November 11th, and that's a great venue. Nice. But there's also venues all over the world. And most of them also have talkbacks, Q&As. And oftentimes Reza Khandan has joined us in those talkbacks. So it's a chance to hear directly from him, often live.
We actually wanted him on this special, but we've heard from Abdolkarim Lahiji that he's actually being counseled to lay low for the next few days, especially as we find out what's happening with Nasrin being moved to prisons and with her health. Jeff, before I let you go, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. And again, I congratulate you on this film. Let me ask you a final question on a more personal level. Over the course of working with this exceptional subject, this exceptional woman, and working on this documentary, you and Marcia, what struck you most about her personally? What can you tell us about Nasrin Sotoudeh beyond what we know as the courageous human rights champion, etc.?
Before I answer that, can I just say I appreciate your interest, not just in Nasrin, but obviously your depth of knowledge and your wider concerns. We just have to realize in all our countries that we have more connections than we have separations. And some constitutions, some leaders fear those connections, but honestly, we're doomed if we don't find ways to mutually respect each other.
Right.
And we've been in an era of a lot of disrespect coming from this country recently and others, and we just have to get past that. So I really, really appreciate what you're doing.
Right on.
As far as Nasrin, Marsh and I have often talked about this. About 3 days before she was arrested, we had like an hour-long chat with Nasrin and Reza as they were walking through a park in Tehran. And it seems like the most sort of simple thing. It was early here, it was late there. As we were talking, it got darker and darker in Tehran. And, we talk about some very serious things, and then we'd laugh and talk about something funny or personal or kids. And I think most people will be reading now about a woman who's in prison and who seems, like concrete, fighting against injustice. But it's a real woman who loves her husband, loves her kids, is very ill and frail right now. And it's someone I think just if you met her, you would just say, I love this person. She's great. It's just, I guess, the reality of someone who can change the world, but is also just a great human being.
Jeff Kaufman, I thank you so much for this today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That is director-writer Jeff Kaufman in Los Angeles. Again, for more info on the documentary, nasrinfilm.com. Shaya? Thank you for all the work you've done on the sound and working for this for the last few days. There is so much more to do with this story, and of course, Nasrin Sotoudeh is just one of many prisoners of conscience in Iran. I hope that we will have the chance to address more of these cases. If you want to share thoughts, please do so, or any ideas on any of our platforms, but certainly you can comment at our website, roqemedia.com. This is Full Time for Roqe today. Thank you to the amazing team who helped put this together twice a week and all of our related Roqe media. Thanks to all of you out there supporting us and sharing the content. Producer Susan, Ponta the artist, blogger Negin, the fabulous Keon, Savvy Roham, Aghay Mehrdad, English, I have English Roham. It's English Muhammad. How many times am I thanking Roham? Captain Reza and Groovy Shaya. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. See you next week. Mizun Bashi.